3 years ago, two friends and I took a camping trip deep into the Granite Plains in South Australia. It wasn't really a campground we were staying at, not even a marked trail really, just flat scrubland broken by boulders, thorny bush, and pockets of eerie silence so complete that it almost suffocated you. The whole point of the trip, though, was to go somewhere untouched. No caravan parks, no phone reception, no distant headlights, just absolute isolation was the plan. But by sundown of our second night, a dry wind had swept across the plains, rattling the spinifex in the hard bursts, and we'd set up the tent beside a cluster of rocks that gave some shelter from the wind. Dinner was simple: jerky, biscuits, and the last of the apples. Then we sat outside and just watched the sky for a bit. Not long after the fire had died down, though, the temperature dropped pretty quickly. The wind stopped entirely, and it just went really eerily still all of a sudden. Like, there were no insects, no breeze, and not even a rustle, and I remember saying, sort of half-jokingly, "It feels like we're being watched, hey?" Nobody laughed. It must have been around 1 a.m. when I woke up to a strange thud outside of the tent, too. I assumed it was my friend going to pee, but when I looked to his side of the tent, he was still zipped up into his sleeping bag, breathing slow and deep. The other was also asleep as far as I knew. That thud, though, it came again, but this time it was followed by footsteps. Not heavy steps, mind you, not like a kangaroo or an emu. I've heard those before, and they don't sound like this. These were slow and deliberate, like someone pacing in boots, except way too steady and too measured, almost like dragging each step slightly. My heart started hammering upon hearing it. I held my breath to listen, and the footsteps moved around the tent, one full circle. Then again, and then they stopped right beside my head. And then something brushed the fabric. Not a paw swipe and not a bump. It was the distinct shape of a hand. 4 long fingers pressing in slowly, feeling the material, moving the way that a person tests the texture of a curtain. Also, the temperature inside of the tent, it dropped instantly. It was like we were in a refrigerator all of a sudden. My friend whispered, barely audible, "Do you hear that walking?" I didn't answer, because the hand, or whatever it was, slowly dragged downward until the pressure disappeared. We waited. Minutes stretched long enough to feel like hours, and then something exhaled just outside. It was the faintest, weird sort of wet sound, like a breath drawn from teeth, but with spit in it. My friend mouthed, "Say something." I shook my head violently. The footsteps started again, circling faster this time, gravel crunching, brush snapping softly. Then it stopped on the opposite side of the tent from before. I noticed a shadow passing across the thin nylon, tall as well, too tall, with oddly shaped sort of angles at the elbows or the shoulders. I couldn't tell, it was hard to make it out, but it looked sort of like a person but stretched the wrong way. The shadow bent as if leaning down to listen. After maybe 30 seconds of unbearable stillness, it moved away, quietly, smoothly, like it knew exactly where to place each step. I can assure you as well that I did not sleep after that. In fact, we both stayed awake the rest of the night, waiting for whatever that was to return. But thankfully, it didn't. Just before sunrise, though, when the sky was going grey, we stepped outside to check the campsite, and there were footprints, but not clear ones, just really weird sort of long impressions. It was almost like a person had walked barefoot, except the shape wasn't right. It was too narrow at the heel, too long at the front, and no clear toes. They circled the tent twice from what we could make out, then veered off into the brush and disappeared over the rocks here. We left within 15 minutes, packing everything in complete silence, and none of us looked back. To this day, we still argue about what we actually saw or what we actually heard. The others say that it might have been a person living out there illegally. They think that it was maybe an animal with deformed tracks, but I can tell you this much. Whatever circled our tent, it definitely walked on two legs. Whatever touched the tent, it certainly had fingers. And whatever made that shadow, it wasn't shaped like any person that I have ever seen. I learned years ago that remote highways behave very differently after dark. Once the sun disappears, everything outside the headlights becomes a blank space, and most people just focus on getting to where they're staying. That was the plan one evening in early 2016, when I was traveling through the Sierra Nevada region in California with my partner Elena, her brother Mark, and Mark's wife Dana. We were unfamiliar with the back roads and relied too much on a GPS that kept redirecting us, but a sign on the main road pointed toward an overlook, and even though we were already running pretty late, we followed it. That detour took us onto a narrow, uneven road that hugged a steep descent. The drop-off on the right side was severe enough that none of us talked for about several minutes. Eventually, though, the road widened and a lodge came into view, built directly into the slope as if it had been anchored there decades earlier. It was called the Old Ridge Inn, though there was nothing particularly ridge-like left around it, just tall, dark timber and a long balcony overlooking a fast-moving creek. The man checking us in, he introduced himself as Mr. Halpern. His clothing didn't match the environment at all, though. He wore a dated formal suit that looked like it belonged to a different era. His posture was straight, his expression neutral, and his greetings were clipped and practiced. When he smiled, it felt automatic and sort of ended abruptly, like he shut it off mid-motion, and he moved slowly as if he was memorizing each of our faces. Our rooms, they were on the far side of the building. The floors creaked heavily under our footsteps as we traveled there. It wasn't the normal aging sound older buildings make. It was loud, irregular, and almost seemed responsive in a way, like boards shifting in reaction to weight instead of age. The balcony behind our room extended slightly over the creek as well, and the water below was fast and produced constant noise, enough to drown out small sounds inside of the room, in fact. Anyway, after we ate in the small dining area, the electricity shut off completely. Power cuts weren't rare in that region, so the staff left lanterns in the rooms, and with nothing else to do, we stayed inside and just talked for a while. The conversation stayed light at first, but the atmosphere shifted because the building felt different without light or background music, I guess. Sometime after 10 p.m., I stepped out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. The temperature had dropped, and the only illumination came from the moon reflecting off the snow higher up on the slopes, and while looking across the opposite hillside, I saw several moving lights spaced evenly apart, descending in a straight line. I called the others out to come and see it. Mark thought that they might be hikers returning from some trail, but the speed and the distance between the lights were too consistent. There were also no headlamps sweeping around, no variation in the brightness. It was a uniform movement down a steep section that would have been very difficult even during daylight. When they reached the creek bed, the one across from us, the lights paused. Then, one by one, they flickered out. We heard nothing. No shouts, no movement, including after the lights disappeared. The hillside went completely dark again within seconds. The four of us, we stayed on the balcony trying to work out through possible explanations. None of them fully made any sense. I mean, the path the lights followed wasn't a trail. The positioning was too exact to be random. The quiet was unusual considering the terrain. A few minutes later, a voice called from below the balcony, though. We all stepped back because it came from a part of the garden where no one had been earlier. It was Mr. Halpern. He stood on a small patch of cleared ground looking straight up at us. The lantern beside him lit only part of his face. He asked if we had seen the group passing through. His tone wasn't surprised or concerned. It sort of sounded like he was mentioning something ordinary. Mark asked who they were, and Halpin explained that hikers sometimes cross the hillside at night for reasons specific to their organization or something. He didn't elaborate and didn't seem interested in providing any more detail either. When Dana asked why their lights had gone out all at once, Halpern said that the terrain near the creek, it was unstable and that groups sometimes chose to continue on foot in the dark there. Even as he said it, the explanation just didn't align with what we saw. Navigating that slope without lights in winter conditions, it was unrealistic, really. He told us that if we heard anything later that we should just ignore it because the creek amplified noises at night. Then he walked back toward the main building without waiting for questions, and that was that. We stayed outside for another half an hour, trying to see if the lights would reappear somewhere else along the ridge, but nothing happened. Eventually, we went inside, though none of us really slept that well that night. Between the shifting floorboards and the constant sound of water below us, it was hard to relax. Nobody mentioned the lights again until morning, but the next day we checked out early. Mr. Halpern acted exactly as he had the night before. Straight posture, a motionless face, short sentences. When we asked whether the area was safe to drive through in winter, he gave a sort of brief nod and said that the roads were maintained when necessary, but nothing else. We left the building and we didn't talk for like several miles. All four of us had the same impression too, that whatever we saw on that hillside wasn't something that he wanted to explain, let alone discuss with us. There were no news reports later about missing hikers or nighttime activity or anything, and nothing about that slope appeared in any of the local posts that we searched. We didn't go back to that region, and none of us have taken unmarked scenic routes in the mountains since then, but I sometimes think back about those lights, and I don't think that they were people. I think that they were something else. Back in 1991, when I had just moved to Wellington, New Zealand, I had started volunteering at Wakefield Hospital. I'd been treated there twice as a kid, once for a broken wrist and once for a really nasty allergic reaction. So when I returned as an adult, donating a few evenings a week felt like the right thing to do. Volunteers rotated between various tasks, but most nights I was stationed at the front desk under the supervision of Moira, a tough-as-nails woman in her 50s, whose personality hit somewhere between strict schoolteacher and your funniest aunt. She told long, winding stories that always ended with a bit of a laugh, and she knew the hospital's history better than anyone. Wakefield had started in the late 1800s as a small private surgery housed in an old timber building. Over decades, different wings were added, removed or redesigned, and absorbed into newer structures. Staff joked that if you peeled back enough layers, you'd probably find 3 or 4 hospitals hidden inside the one standing today. Now, my shift, it always ran the same. Arrive at 5:30 p.m, assist with deliveries and visitors' passes, grab a quick meal around 8, and then run paperback between departments until I clocked out at 10. One night though, near the end of winter, around 9:15 p.m, Moira handed me a manila envelope and asked me to drop it off at the nursing coordinator's station on the 4th floor. It wasn't a part of the building that I had been to before, but she gave me directions, well, sort of anyway. Moira's directions were usually more like suggestions, really. But I took the lift up and I immediately felt lost. After trying 2 different hallways though, and looping myself back to the same vending machine 3 times, I decided to start fresh and push through the first door I saw that didn't look restricted. The moment that I stepped inside, the atmosphere changed. Instead of the bright clinical corridors that I knew, I found myself in a really long passage, lit by unusually dim wall sconces. The floor was covered in pale green linoleum and it was patterned with tiny squares, the kind that you'd expect to see in something like the 1950s. The air smelled faintly of old varnish and something sterile but outdated, like an aged dental office almost, but for a moment I wondered if I'd stumbled into one of the original hospital wings that Moira always talked about. I had no idea anything this old was still intact. A narrow staircase led downward on the right, guarded by the wrought iron rail. Halfway along the hall, I noticed a recessed drinking fountain, one of those sort of deep ceramic types with metal push levers that they haven't installed in ages. But something felt off. There was no signs, no exit arrows, no modern safety labels, nothing. And the place was silent in a way that hospitals rarely are. I shook off my unease and started walking toward the door at the far end. If anything else, it had to lead to somewhere, right? About 10 meters in, I slowed down. Something, though I couldn't see it, was stopping me. It wasn't a wall and it wasn't physical, but every step forward felt like wading through thick, resistant air now. I leaned forward, pushed my shoulder through the space, and that was when something pushed back. My mind jumped, bizarrely, to an article that I'd read years earlier about historical perception, the idea that if time travel were somehow possible, you wouldn't actually interact with the past, that you'd see it like a scene behind glass. That memory made my heart drop a bit, because the sensation that I felt, being held back by nothing, fit that theory uncomfortably well. For a few seconds, I stood completely still, listening, and I swear that I could sense movement deeper down the hallway. Not footsteps exactly, but just the impression of people going about tasks that I couldn't see. The feeling was so strange, so heavy that I instinctively braced my palms against the invisible pressure and forced myself forward, inch by inch, and the resistance gave way, like pushing through a thick membrane. When it finally let go, I almost stumbled. I hurried to the door, shoved it open, and found myself stepping out into a brightly lit, thoroughly modern nurses' station, less than 20 feet away. I must have looked rattled because one of the nurses immediately asked if I was all right. I handed the envelope over with shaking hands and asked where this hallway even was. She gave me a puzzled look. "There's no hallway on the other side of that door. That's just a storage closet." I turned and, sure enough, the door that I had come through was labeled cleaning supplies. By the time that I followed the normal hallways back to the front desk, it was now 10 p.m. Moira was waiting for me, arms crossed. "You vanished," she scolded. "Did you get lost floating with one of the registers? Honestly, half of them think that they're God's gift." I told her the only version that she might not laugh at, that I accidentally wandered into some old corridor during renovations and I got stuck behind a stiff door. But she burst out laughing anyway. "There hasn't been a usable original hallway in that part of the building for decades," she said. "They gutted it in like the 70s. Come back next shift and I'll show you." And she did. 2 days later, she literally dragged me upstairs and we checked every door, storage closet, utility room, and emergency exit. And nothing resembled the space that I know that I had walked through. There was no old retro lights, no iron staircase, nothing. For almost 2 years afterward as well, I would occasionally slip away on breaks to hunt for it again, partly to prove that I hadn't lost my mind, partly because the experience just felt, well, unfinished. But I never found anything even remotely close. Eventually my work hours changed and I had to stop volunteering. Wakefield Hospital has expanded since then, modernizing again and absorbing 2 nearby clinics. I still walk past the place sometimes, and you would never know just how many layers it hides beneath the surface, but I'll probably never know what that was or how I came to be in that position, but I certainly have never stopped thinking about it. I've put this off for years now, mostly because it still makes my chest tighten when I think back on it. But after seeing other people share their own strange experiences here, I figured that it might be finally time to lay my one out. Who knows, maybe it'll help someone or at least keep them from wandering down the same path that I did. When I was 22, this would have been late 1998 into early 1999, I lived in a small flat above a laundromat in Bristol, UK. I was working nights at a bar, sleeping at odd hours, and spending most of my free time buried in secondhand books about mysticism, esoteric philosophy, and sort of fringe spirituality stuff. I told myself that it was all just curiosity, but looking back, I realized just how aimless and cracked open I felt during that time. I didn't have any boundaries, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and really I just let anything in. A co-worker of mine, Elise, liked to doodle a little bit while we sat outside the bar on smoke breaks. One evening, she was sketching absent-mindedly on a takeaway menu and then shoved it toward me with a frown. "This keeps happening when I look at you," she said. "It looks like a spiky halo radiating outward." I laughed it off, asked whether she was teasing. She said that she wasn't. She wasn't sure what it meant, only that your energy feels loud. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it stayed with me for days afterwards. Anyway, a few months later I went through a breakup that absolutely flattened me. I spent weeks barely leaving the flat, reading obscure books and convincing myself that if intention could influence anything, maybe I could use it to shift my life back on track. I didn't do any rituals, nothing dramatic, just sort of focused, breath-held wishes, the kind of thing that you'd all call harmless if you didn't know what was coming. And then, one night, I felt something respond. I still don't know how to describe it properly, but it was like leaning too far over a railing and sort of realizing that there's just nothing underneath. A pressure, an opening, or a sensation that something enormous and unfamiliar had suddenly noticed me. The next morning, I boxed up every occult book that I owned and dropped them at a charity shop. I told myself firmly that I was done with this, but something had already slipped in. I felt it before I saw anything too, a presence that absolutely towered over me, thin and heavy at the same time, like a tall shadow bent into impossible angles. It never fully stepped into view. It always stayed in corners and just out of frame, like it knew that showing itself outright would break something in me. It wasn't constant, but it certainly lingered. Cooking dinner, it would hover behind me. Folding laundry, I'd feel something leaning over my shoulder. It didn't seem as close outdoors, but inside of that flat, especially at night, it felt like the walls just were not mine anymore. Around that time, I had started keeping a dream journal to help with mild sleep paralysis that I had since childhood. Turns out that was a huge mistake. The journaling, it sharpened my dreams to the point where I began slipping into these sort of hyper-lucid, half-out-of-body states before falling asleep, and I'd drift a few centimeters out of myself, eyes wide open though my physical ones were shut, and I'd see things that I had absolutely no business seeing. 3 nights in a row, the same thing happened too. I would float just above my body, unable to blink or move, and something would form above me. Not a figure exactly, but more like threads of black pulling together, weaving into a long, glossy, spindle-limbed shape that sort of stared down at me. And then I would just snap, and I would be locked into sleep paralysis. But the fourth night, something changed. I was in that suspended state again, right on the line of between dreaming and waking, when a smaller, warm light pushed into the room. The light isn't really accurate, though. It was more like a shape made of warmth, guidance, or pressure. Whatever it was, it drove this darker thing back. I dropped into my body like someone had let go of me, and for the first time in months, I finally slept without fear. The tall, crooked presence, it didn't vanish after that, but it certainly kept its distance. It felt like whatever had intervened had drawn a line it just couldn't cross any longer. Anyway, years passed and the memories faded into something that I tried to rationalize. I moved in 2002 for work, thinking that a new environment would help me reset a bit, and I didn't talk about this with anyone, not even the people that I dated at the time. But then one night in 2004, my girlfriend at the time shook me awake at around 3 a.m. "Something's standing in the hallway," she whispered. My stomach instantly dropped. I had not told her a single thing about my past experiences, not even one, and she refused to go back to sleep until morning light came in. When we talked over breakfast, she told me that the women in her family had sight, though not in a sort of religious sense, more like an inherited intuition mixed with whatever folk beliefs get passed down quietly. She insisted that something was attached to me and that her aunt could perform a cleansing ritual from her family tradition. I declined, and that relationship ended not long after that. The years that followed, they were not kind. Several personal losses hit one after another. I slipped into depression, drinking too much, running on empty, and eventually I moved again, back to Canada where I had grown up, and at the urging of a co-worker, I signed up for a week-long retreat hosted by an Indigenous group near Thunder Bay, Ontario. It was structured like an intense sort of coming-of-age rite sort of thing, fasting, time alone, then purification, ending with a sweat lodge ceremony. By day 5, I was physically drained and mentally stripped raw. And when the final night came and we crawled into the sweat lodge, heat pressing in from all directions, something inside of me felt like it was coming apart all of a sudden. When I stumbled out into the cool air afterward, an elder guided me to sit on a stone. I was shaking so badly that he had to steady the water bottle that he had given me. "You're carrying less now," he said quietly. "Something had been eating at you for a long time." I didn't tell him a word of my history, not even a sentence, but he said it with the certainty of like someone naming the weather. He brushed his hand lightly through the air beside me and nodded. Whatever that was, it's now gone. And for the first time in nearly a decade, the air around me suddenly felt empty, in the best possible way, space that belonged to me again. I don't want to make it sound like that retreat magically fixed my life or anything, because it really didn't, but it certainly recalibrated something. I started therapy, running, lifting, eating properly. I learned to pay attention to my mental health instead of trying to bypass it with spiritual shortcuts. And eventually I found yoga, though I pushed that too far once as well, and that's another story for another time, with its own warning attached, but I'll wrap this up by saying this. I don't claim to know what I invited in all those years ago. I don't know whether it was just psychological, spiritual, or something sort of in between, but I do know that there are ways of opening yourself that are far easier than closing yourself again. Curiosity isn't dangerous by itself per se, but curiosity mixed with emotional vulnerability can make you porous to things that you're not equipped to understand. These days, I keep my grounding practices simple. I don't reach for anything otherworldly, and I just make sure that my space feels like mine all the time. I keep lavender and cedar in the house, and whether or not it does anything metaphysical, it keeps me centered. That's enough for me. I'm not trying to scare anyone here or anything, but I only want to say to be careful with what you invite into your inner world. Doors don't always close because you want them shut, and you need to be careful with that. This happened when we were living in a rental house in Ballina, New South Wales, about 10 years ago. It was me, my partner, our daughter, who was 7 at the time, and our son, who had just turned 4. The place was nothing unusual. Bright blue weatherboard house, plenty of windows, cheerful neighborhood. Nothing about it felt ominous. I worked remotely as an analyst back then, though, glued to my laptop most days. My partner worked mornings in a clinic in town. Because of our schedules, my son spent most weekdays with me. The house had a second-level living space beneath the main floor. Technically not a basement, but more like a converted lower level with a big sliding door that opened to the yard. It was filled with toys and books, and he loved playing down there sometimes while I was taking calls upstairs. It was a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a completely ordinary, sun-soaked weekday, and I remember because I had just made a cup of tea and was sitting at the dining table answering some work messages. Nothing felt strange. There was no tension, no odd noises, no sense that anything was off. Then I heard a scream. Not the kind of yell that kids make when they trip or get startled. This was a sharp and raw, pure panic scream. I instantly dropped my mug and sprinted toward the stairs. I was so sure that he had broken a bone or gotten his hand caught in something that I was already running through first aid steps in my head. Halfway down the stairs, I saw him bolting up toward me, red-faced and shaking. I grabbed him and checked him over, but there were no injuries, no scratches, nothing. So I asked him what had happened. He looked over his shoulder, eyes wide as coins, and said, "There's a bad person down there. Not a monster, not a shadow, or not something scary, but just a person," is what he said. The lower level could only be entered from the inside of the house, and the yard facing the doors had deadbolts on them that we kept locked pretty much always. Which means that really nobody could have gotten in without us noticing it. There wasn't even a path behind the house. Now, before I could say anything else, the sound started. Heavy footsteps, not subtle and not creeping. They came up the stairs in violent, deliberate thuds, each step landing hard enough that I felt the vibrations through the wood underneath my own feet. It was like someone much heavier than me was launching themselves upward, hitting each step with their full weight. And it was close, 5 or 6 steps below us at the very most. I could feel the rapid rhythm of the impacts through my feet, and my son clung to my shirt so tightly that he stretched the fabric. I froze for a split second. I genuinely thought that someone had broken in and was sprinting toward us, but the stairway was directly in front of me and nothing was visible. There was just the sound and the shaking wood, which I could see the wood bending. Then it stopped midway up the staircase. The footsteps just ended. No door, no turn, no retreat. It was just gone. I instantly rushed upstairs with my son, shut the hallway door, called my partner, and then called a neighbor to come and check the lower floor with me. We walked the entire level, every corner, every cupboard, behind the curtains, beneath the furniture. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing, and no sign of any intruder. My son, he would not go near that part of the house for months afterwards too. He never saw anything again, thankfully, and as he grew older, he lost the memory entirely. When I asked him about it a few years ago, he just sort of shrugged like I was describing somebody else's story. But for me, that moment never faded. I don't know what caused those footsteps. I don't know what terrified him so intensely, and I cannot explain why the noise felt so utterly real, so physical. I swear that I could feel the rise and the fall of the weight on each stair, and I'll never be able to explain the bend in the stairs that I saw. I'm certainly not someone who jumps to supernatural explanations quickly. I'm still not. But that day, it sits outside every category that I've tried to put it in. The only thing that I know for certain is that something ran up after him, something that I didn't see but definitely heard. Even now when I think about it for too long, I get that same chilling feeling that I did standing on that staircase that day, like something large and unseen had nearly reached me before vanishing into thin air. I never meant to spend decades thinking about something that lasted less than a minute. But memory is strange in that way. Certain moments cling to you for reasons that you don't fully understand. I wasn't interested in strange phenomena back then, and I certainly wasn't looking for anything unusual. It was just an ordinary evening in Hobart, Tasmania, sometime in late July of 1999, cold enough that the windows would fog if you breathed too close. I was upstairs in my room, half-heartedly sorting through homework, when I was hit with this sudden sharp feeling, like someone nudged the back of my mind and told me to stand up. No sound, no movement, just that odd intrusive urge to sort of look outside. I wandered over to the small window facing the street and leaned close to see past the reflection of my own face. I tipped my head up, and that's when I saw it sliding over the rooftops, almost directly above our house. At first, my brain tried to call it a plane, but none of the guesses that I had even came close to what I was looking at. It drifted overhead with a stillness that felt impossible, a broad, rounded shape with a sort of faint sheen to it, as though the surface absorbed light instead of reflecting it. What struck me most was its silence, though, like absolute silence, the kind that made the hair on my arm stand up. If it had been any lower, I swear that I could have reached out of the window and touched it too. The craft was larger than any city buses that rumbled through our suburb, perhaps even longer, and shaped a bit like a curved disc with what looked like a raised section at the center. Dotted across the underside were clusters of like dim lights, pale yellow, dull red, and a handful of sort of bluish-white ones that seemed to pulse faintly, almost like breathing, and the lights weren't arranged symmetrically, which made it feel less mechanical and more organic in a way that I still struggle to describe. The object angled slightly as it moved, giving me a clearer view of its side. There were what looked like narrow slits or panels that glowed from within, though the glow wasn't strong enough to spill into the houses below, and I couldn't make out any texture to its surface. In fact, it looked perfectly smooth, like polished stone or wet metal. It moved slowly, steadily, gliding without any wobble or vibration. No wind followed it, no hum, no disturbance in the cold air. I watched it drift toward the distant hills behind the city, shrinking as it ascended until it became a faint blot against the dark sky. During the whole thing, though, my mind couldn't latch onto a single familiar explanation for what the heck this was. It was like trying to name a color that you've never seen before. I remember gripping the window frame so tightly that my fingers ached. My heart wasn't even racing, though. I think I was too stunned for fear to even kick in. Later that week, I checked whatever local reports that I could find. Newspapers, old internet forums, anything. A few people from areas outside of the city claimed to have seen something moving strangely across the sky that evening, though none describe it quite the way that I saw it. I barely talked about it afterward, to be honest. Not out of embarrassment, but because I just never felt like I had the right words to explain what I witnessed. Well, without sounding completely unhinged, that is. Life moved on, I guess, and Years passed, and that strange shape above the rooftops became something that I carried in silence with me. These days, with all the discussion about unusual aerial sightings, it's tempting to pretend that we have a language for these things now. But the truth is that whenever I saw that night, it just didn't fit into the categories then, and it still doesn't now. I don't claim to know what it was. I only know that it wasn't a plane, it wasn't a helicopter, and was not anything that I've ever seen before or since then. The quiet object drifting overhead in the winter dark, whatever it was, remains the only moment in my life that truly refuses to fade. It was late February of 2022, during my 4th year at university. There was a small family gathering at a boutique lodge my dad had rented, and since I was living in student housing only a few suburbs away, I figured that I would walk there instead of catching a ride. I'd been to the lodge with the family half a dozen times by now. Barbecues, birthdays, random weekends. The route was painfully simple. Hop off the bus, take a single long road toward the coast, turn once, and the lodge sat right at the end. My brother joked that even he couldn't get lost, and he once ended up at the wrong campus entirely. But this was the first time that I was heading there alone, you see. I arrived at around 1:15 p.m. The sky was cloudless, the street looked normal, quiet houses, trimmed hedges, the distant rumble of the ocean. I turned down the road that I had taken every time before, and I started walking. But somehow after a few minutes, I was back at the exact same corner where I had begun. Same trees leaning over the pavement, same little post box with a peeling number 47. I actually laughed out loud, assuming that I had zoned out scrolling on my phone or something. I tried another turn, and another, and straight, left, slight right, but it didn't matter. Each path curved back to the same corner like the streets were folding in on themselves. It didn't feel like getting lost, it felt like the neighborhood was sort of rearranging behind me. That's when it hit me too, the silence that I hadn't noticed. There wasn't a single person walking their dog, no cyclists, no cars rolling past, not even the sound of a lawnmower, which here is basically unheard of in the summer weekends. In any case, my dad called, irritated that I wasn't there yet. He tried giving me directions, go past the roundabout, look for the white fence, but everything that he described might as well have been in another country. Nothing matched anything around me, and eventually I hung up because hearing his voice made the whole thing feel more surreal. After almost an hour of looping the same few streets, my legs were absolutely shaking. I dropped onto the curb, poured warm water from my bottle over my face, and tried to steady my breathing. The sun was baking the pavement, the air felt dead, and for a few minutes I just sort of sat there staring at the stillness, wondering if I was dehydrated or disassociating or maybe even just losing my mind. Then, like a cut in a film, someone was standing halfway down the road. There was no approaching shape, no footsteps, but one blink the street was empty, and the next there was a figure just there. It was my dad's cousin, Joanna, and I hadn't seen her in years. She waved at me like it was the most normal thing in the world and told me that she had thought that she saw me walk past earlier. She pointed down a side road that I swear that I hadn't seen there like 10 seconds before and told me to keep straight. I followed her instructions, and within 5 minutes I was now at the lodge. Sunbathers, traffic, chatter, normal life all around me again. I did tell my dad the whole story, but he brushed it off as heat exhaustion or me missing a turn. I tried to believe that too. I really did. Months later, I mentioned it casually to my aunt during a family dinner, and she froze before I even finished. She then told me that she had had the exact same experience near that same intersection 15 years earlier, wandering in circles in daylight every route folding back in on itself at the same point. The streets emptied out like someone had pressed mute on the world. She said that a few other locals had mentioned the same thing too, always within the same handful of blocks and always on blistering hot days. She even told me the name that some older residents use for it, a turning pocket, a place as they describe as where you walk right but the world gently pushes you left. Honestly, I still don't know what happened to me. I don't have any explanation that fits cleanly, and all I can say is that for a little while in a sunny suburb, I knew like the back of my hand that I walked into a place that didn't behave the way that a normal neighborhood should, and I still don't know why. If anyone has gone through any sort of similar situation to this, then I would really love to hear about it. It's been 2 years since then, and I still replay it more than I want to admit in my own mind, so if you have any explanation as to what this is, then please do share. I've spent years watching scary documentaries before bed, without ever even giving it a second thought. It's a stupid habit that I picked up in high school. Finishing assignments, put on something creepy, fall asleep with the screen still glowing. You know the drift. It never really bothered me, but one night last winter made me rethink that entirely. It was late July of 2023. I was living alone in a small rental unit. It was close enough to a forest area that nights were usually pretty silent, except for the wind and maybe some animals scraping across the fence every now and then. Anyway, around midnight, I reheated leftovers and put on an old documentary about an exorcism case from the 70s. The film included the original audio recordings, long scratches of like guttural sounds, frantic breathing and all that. The kind of sounds that really get under your skin, even if you don't think anything supernatural is going on. By the time that it ended, I felt this really uncomfortable sort of buzzing in my head, like I'd overlooked myself. I shut everything down and I crawled into bed at around 2:15 a.m. Now, about an hour later, something jolted me awake. It wasn't a voice or footsteps or anything. It was a thud of something falling in another room. My kitchen isn't really that big. If a mug did topple, I would know exactly what it sounded like. But this was heavier. I shuffled down the hallway, sort of half asleep, expecting to find a mess on the floor, but nothing was out of place. But what was strange was the heaviness in the atmosphere that I felt. I sort of turned around instinctively, convinced that I had seen someone standing in the doorway at one point, but the hall was empty. As you can probably imagine, that snapped me awake. I walked backwards out of the kitchen and shut my bedroom door a little too quickly. I kept telling myself that it was just the documentary messing with me. I got back into bed and I tried focusing on my breathing. But maybe 30 minutes later, something pulled me out of my sleep again, this time with no noise at all, just the abrupt feeling of being watched all of a sudden. When I opened my eyes, I swear to you that I saw two shapes hovering inches from my face. Not detailed faces or anything, just impressions, dark, way too close. And for one horrifying moment, I felt like my body had been sort of pushed upward, as if something leaned in toward me at that exact second that I had woken up. The sensation was weird, and it was gone almost instantly the moment that I woke up, leaving me frozen in place, unable to scream or even blink. I grabbed my phone purely out of instinct, switched on the flashlight and stared at the ceiling until my heartbeat slowed a bit. I played music, scrolled through random videos, anything to anchor myself back into reality. It worked enough for the fear to fade, at least a little bit. Then, just when I thought things were settling down, my dog, who had been sleeping at the foot of the bed, lunged upright and vomited on the floor everywhere. Now, He is a very healthy dog, rarely ever gets sick, and the suddenness of it with everything else, it really rattled me more than I want to admit. I cleaned it up and I sat with him for a while, but he kept glancing toward the doorway, ears pinned back, as if he was hearing something that I couldn't. Eventually, he barked one sharp guttural bark into the empty hallway, then another, and that bothered me more than anything else that night for some weird reason. I left the lights on after that. I'm not even ashamed to say it, but at some point exhaustion won and I drifted off. The next morning, everything looked normal too. The kitchen was tidy, the hallway quiet, my dog acting like the night never even happened, and for a few hours I convinced myself that it was all just a chain reaction. A late-night documentary, half dreams, an anxious mind turning shadows into shapes, and my dog just being sick. But I still could not explain the sound in the kitchen. All those two dark shapes so close that I could literally feel the warmth of my own breath bouncing back at me. And look, maybe it was nothing. Maybe my brain was firing off leftover images from the documentary or something. Or maybe exhaustion can twist reality more than we like to admit. I don't want to jump to the supernatural explanation, but whatever happened that night, it didn't feel like imagination. It felt like something brushing up against the edge of my awareness and then sort of slipping away before I could understand it. I've been watching horror stuff right before bed still, and that's as far as my conclusions really go at this point. Beyond that, I honestly don't know what to make of any of it. It was early in the year of 2019 when my friends and I decided to go camping in Cedar Creek. It's a small, remote area in northern New South Wales in Australia. We had heard the place was quiet, perfect for hiking and fishing, and completely off the radar of tourists. I'd been camping there before, but this was my first time going so deep into the bush. Well, we arrived at around noon, we set up our tents near a clearing by the creek, and we spent the afternoon fishing and just sort of joking around. The sky was clear, stars barely obscured by the fading sunset, and by 9 p.m. we built a small fire, roasted some marshmallows, and were telling stories about the local wildlife here. It must have been around 11 p.m. when we noticed a bit of a strange, low humming sound coming from the trees. At first we thought it was maybe a generator or a truck off in the distance, but there were no roads within a few kilometers from here. The hum was steady as well, metallic, and it didn't match any animal that we knew of. Then, one of my friends, Jamie, he pointed upward. At first I thought that he was joking, but there it was, a pale circular light hovering silently over the treetops, moving in a very smooth, almost deliberate pattern. No blinking navigation lights, no sound besides the hum, nothing that resembled any helicopter, plane, or drone that I'd ever seen. We froze, and none of us had ever witnessed anything like this. The light descended slowly toward the clearing, stopping just above the tree line. Its surface looked smooth and reflective, and from what I could make out, there were no visible seams, there were no engines or propellers or anything. Instinctively, we ducked behind our tents, whispering frantically about what to do. The hum, it grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath us, and it felt weirdly unnatural, heavy as if the air itself was charged all of a sudden. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light shot upward at an impossible speed, disappearing over the horizon in a blink. We each just sat there, in stunned silence, hearts racing, not knowing what to say. My phone, which had full battery earlier, showed no signal and wouldn't turn on properly. The compass app spun wildly, refusing to point north any longer, and it was like every electronic device around us had just been affected. None of us spoke for the rest of the night. Sleep was impossible for pretty much all of us. Every rustle of the trees, every snapping branch, it sounded like something moving through the underbrush, watching us. That was probably just paranoia, but still, it was definitely hard to sleep. By sunrise, we had packed up and we left the campsite faster than I had ever moved before. On the way back, I noticed strange circular impressions in the ground, though, where the clearing had been, and the grass was flattened into perfect concentric rings. It was subtle and barely noticeable unless you were really looking directly for it, but it was definitely there. We never went back, and even now thinking about it makes the hairs on my neck stand on end. I've read about UFO sightings in the remote parts of Australia before, but experiencing something so close and silent like that, with no explanation, out in the middle of nowhere, well, it changed the way that I look at the night sky, probably forever. Sometimes, too, when I'm driving late at night in rural roads or somewhere dark, I always remember just how close it felt and how small we all felt, and how completely powerless that we were in its presence. I don't usually talk about security issues that I've dealt with at home, but something happened earlier this year that it still doesn't sit right with me. It occurred on a Thursday afternoon in the small town that I live in, where my family also lives. The area isn't isolated or anything, but it's certainly small enough that most people recognize one another, and unannounced visitors are pretty uncommon. So, at the time I was back from college because I had come down with a fever. It was around 1:40 p.m. and I was on the couch with my dog trying to find something to watch. That's when I heard someone knocking repeatedly at the front door. The knocks were forceful and not casual, and within a few seconds the door handle started moving like somebody was testing it. Because we don't have many visitors during the day, as I mentioned earlier, I got up to go and check. When I reached the kitchen and looked through the blinds, I saw a man standing close enough to the window that he'd already been looking inside. As soon as he noticed me, he stepped back, turned away quickly, and moved toward the footpath. Another person was waiting near the street. Both were wearing dark clothing, and the man at the window had a face covering that only exposed his eyes and his mouth. They walked out of the court and kept going until they were no longer visible. That interaction didn't last more than maybe a few seconds, but it was uncomfortable because the last time something unusual happened on our property like this, our shed had been broken into. Considering that many residents were at work during that time of the day as well, there weren't many potential witnesses around, which maybe they knew that. Later, we asked a couple of nearby residents if they had noticed anything. One neighbor 2 houses down said that she saw the same 2 men walking through the area shortly before they reached our place. She also said that she didn't recognize either of them, and we contacted the police and filed a report, but there really wasn't much else to do because no property damage had occurred and they didn't try anything further after leaving. The officers said that they would patrol the area more often for the next few days, but they didn't have any immediate leads, and so that was it. Now, I recognize that it's possible that they were looking for a specific house. There is a man on our street known for being involved in drugs, and he's had people showing up at odd hours before. But that's only speculation, and really nothing else has happened since then, and the police never followed up beyond the initial report. The whole thing was pretty short, but the part that stayed with me was seeing someone deliberately looking through the kitchen window in the middle of the day like that, with his face covered. Even though nothing further happened, it was a clear reminder to keep the doors locked, even during daylight hours. That's all I know about the incident, and unless more information turns up, I doubt I'll ever understand why they chose my house that afternoon, whether it was just opportunistic, or whether there was more intent behind the choice. I hadn't thought about this incident for years, That is until my sister mentioned something unrelated that brought it back to mind. It happened when I was pretty young, living in a low-income neighborhood. The area wasn't dangerous every day, but it certainly wasn't a place where kids roamed around without keeping an eye on their surroundings. Most afternoons, I played outside with the other kids who lived around the block. One of them, a boy named Evan, lived diagonally across from us in a weathered duplex. He was a couple of grades older than me and slept in a converted loft above his family's place, which always seemed interesting to me at the time. I first met him when we went door to door, offering to mow lawns for money one day. One evening, though, in late August of 2009, I was at his house playing games for a few hours. It got dark and his parents told me that it was time to head home. Evan said that he would walk with me, even though I could literally see my house from the end of his driveway. As we reached the road, a man in dark clothes stepped out from between two parked cars. He had a black hoodie pulled tight around his face, and the way that he approached didn't look casual. In fact, he walked directly toward us without any hesitation. He asked us, "What are your names?" I didn't want to answer because the situation felt off. But before I said anything, Evan introduced himself and then gave my name too. The man followed up by asking what we usually did outside, and Evan mentioned the small pool table upstairs. The man still hadn't shared anything about himself. No name, no reason for talking to us. He then asked, "Where are you both living?" That question shifted the whole situation from strange to concerning. I already knew by that age that we weren't supposed to give out personal information to adults that we didn't know. So I pointed at a house that wasn't mine and said that that's where I stayed. Evan immediately contradicted me though, and pointed directly at my house. I felt trapped because now the man had accurate information about where I lived. The man looked at me again and said, "Which place is yours?" I tried to stick to my lie and argued with Evan, who genuinely didn't seem to understand why I was doing it. The man watched us argue and then said, "It's alright, just tell me." The way that he said it didn't feel friendly. I doubled down and repeated the lie, saying the house that I pointed to was mine and that Evan didn't know because he had never been there before. When the man still didn't seem convinced, I panicked and yelled that my dad had guns and would deal with anyone who came to our house. None of which was true, but I said it to discourage him. After I raised my voice, though, the man said that he had to leave and he walked off without another word. I ran straight inside as well, slammed the door and told my mum that someone was going to break in because Evan gave out our real address to them. I don't think she was sure about what to make of the story. She told me to calm down and stay inside for the night, and so I did. I struggled to sleep for the next few days because I kept replaying the conversation and imagining the man coming back. I also stopped spending time with Evan after that. I didn't explain it well. I just sort of said that he shouldn't have told the stranger anything, and I think that he took it personally. In any case, we moved to another part of town about a month later due to unrelated reasons. But a few weeks after the move, my mum told me in a really sober tone that Evan had apparently disappeared. His family reported him missing, and some people said that he might have run away. At the time, I was way too young to consider anything else and put two and two together. But as an adult, I've wondered about that night more than once. I don't know if the man had anything to do with Evan going missing, and I cannot assume anything without evidence, but what I can say is that the whole encounter felt wrong from the start, and I still think that my instincts were accurate. I really have no way of knowing what actually happened to him now, but I do hope that he was eventually found because, as far as I know, I don't think that he was. So, I'm kind of looking for advice, but also sharing my experience from last night, and also some from my past. I'm wondering if they're related, I guess. To start, I guess I should say that for the past 5 years or so, I've been suffering from some intense and terrifying sleep paralysis. It has always involved a tall, shadowy figure with no other distinct features. The experiences vary, but always end up with me screaming myself awake in an attempt to get somebody to wake me up. Maybe it's related, maybe it's not, but I figure that it could be useful information. Rewind, if you will, to when I was between the ages of 4 and 8. I'm basing that time frame on the house that I lived in at the time. I had a reoccurring nightmare where a tall, brownish-grey, shadowy figure would chase me around my house, which had turned into a dark, foggy, and sort of mossy landscape within the structure of the house. I would always open my eyes and I would see this figure wandering around outside my bedroom, and I would hide behind my door. Then it would come and start peeking through the crack in between the door frame and the door, and start to curl its unnaturally long fingers around the open side of the door. At this point, I would crawl under my bed and let it come into the room, then squeeze out of the other side of my bed and run out of my room and proceed to turn all of the lights on in the house while this thing followed me. I would eventually end up in my parents' bedroom, turn their light on and start screaming as it approached their door. And it was at this point that I would actually wake up, and all of the lights would be on in the house, and I mean every single light, every closet, laundry room, my sister's rooms, bathrooms, etc. Mind you, nothing different ever happened in the dream, but it did occur frequently. And my parents, they have acknowledged that I was constantly sleepwalking, turning on the lights, so I know that that's not a false memory, but I'm not saying that it can't just be a reoccurring nightmare, and that's it. However, the dreams stopped after we moved out of that house, which obviously was very strange. Fast forward though to when I was 10 or 11. There was one late spring day where nothing particularly interesting happened. I went to school, came home, did my homework, played some video games with some friends, and went home to eat some dinner. After dinner, I took our dog for a walk around our neighborhood. I love to go on long walks with our dog at night, and just to listen to the entire Linkin Park Meteora album. However, on this night, my CD player stopped working about halfway into Don't Stay, first full-length song on the album. So I took off my headphones and we kept walking since our dog knew the route that we normally take. About 10 or 15 minutes into our walk, I noticed that the night was, for some reason, unusually quiet. We lived close to a fairly busy main road, and 2 miles from an airport, so ambient traffic and airline noise was really normal here. But this night, I really heard none of it. I look overhead at a plane about to land at the airport, and weirdly, there was zero sound. I can hear our footsteps and my dog's breath, and really that was it. Another plane passes overhead with no sound again. I chalk it up to weather and the wind or something, and I keep walking. Nothing else really eventful happens on the walk or after I get home, but I get into bed and have a deeply sinking feeling right as I drift off into a dreamless sleep. I awake the next morning a little before 5 a.m., 2 hours earlier than normal, and feel like I really didn't sleep at all. It genuinely felt like I stayed up all night long. I felt delirious, foggy, and really shaky. My lower back was itchy, so naturally I went to scratch my itch and noticed 2 roughly quarter-sized scabs directly on my spine, one about a half-inch above the other. Even as I share this, I can still feel where they were as well. Obviously, I freak out and I tell my mum. She says that they are perfect circles as well and asks what I fell on. Mind you, I didn't fall on or back into anything. I was never laying face down and had something land on me either. There was no blood on any of my shirt as well, which was really strange. They seemed to have just simply appeared, and they were completely gone and healed in 2 days with no scars as well, which, again, it just seems, well, impossible. Anyway, fast forward to last night, a little over 20 years later, and I woke up at 4 a.m. on the dot, wide awake, with the feeling that I was being watched. I sat up in bed and looked around. I didn't see anything worth noticing, so I went outside to get some fresh air for a minute or two and then went back to bed. Right as I was about to fall asleep, I heard something heavy running on our roof. I sat up again to listen for it, but nothing more happened. So I went back to sleep around 4:30 or 4:45. When I woke up to my alarm at 6:30 this morning, I once again felt like I didn't get a single minute of sleep. The way my body felt was very reminiscent of pulling all-nighters at the gaming shop when I was in high school. I decided to check my Fitbit app to see if I just didn't get a good sleep, but it says that I was in a light sleep to awake from 3:25 until 4, and completely awake from 4 o'clock till 5:45. But I know I closed my eyes again and started drifting off well before 5. If you've made it this far, then thanks for hearing me out. If you have any thoughts about what happened to me or advice, then genuinely, I would love to hear it. I need to figure out what happened last night and in my past, and if you have any advice as to how I could do this, then please do let me know. Me and my friend, both girls, both 13 at the time, took an evening stroll at a really dodgy part of town. Really idiotic, I know, but this was pre-2015. It was January and it was pretty dark outside. No people were around, except for 2 blocks down where there was a bus stop and a 7-Eleven. As we pass a newly built apartment complex, we start heading towards the bus stop. Before I understood what happened, someone trips over my leg, falls face down on the pavement, scratching himself, and drops something that rattles, metallic-y on the asphalt. We both find ourselves staring at an adult male who starts screaming bloody murder, grasping the thing that fell out of his hand as he gets up and starts charging at us, telling us to get over here. We immediately start running towards the apartment complex. The door was unlocked, thank God, and we rush up the stairs and encounter a couple who were on their way out. We explained the situation to them, holding back tears. The man thankfully didn't follow us inside. The couple tried to calm us down and followed us outside, and no man was there to be seen. He had just vanished. The couple, they seemed to be in a hurry and decided to just leave us to get back home on our own. As we go towards the bus stop, really shaken up, we see the same man enter the bus that's just about to leave. He looks really calm now and put together, at least from the glance that I got. His bus leaves and we get home sometime later, not telling our parents about the situation since we were scared that they'd get mad that we decided to walk into that area of town and never let us walk again or something. It's been more than 10 years since then, and we both discussed this pretty often as we really had no idea what actually happened. The man honestly just seemingly appeared out of nowhere as we didn't hear him approach until he was about a few meters away, and there were no people around us to drown out the noise of him approaching. We don't know exactly what he was holding in his hand that he dropped. All we heard was the weird rattling sound and saw something silver looking. We questioned if it was a folding knife, but the memory is so foggy by now and we honestly didn't get a good look at it. I also don't know how I managed to trip him up either, and why he seemingly stopped chasing us after a few steps. At first we thought that I just accidentally made him fall as he started running toward the bus stop, but he came up behind me and the angle that he came from left several meters free from either side of me that he easily could have used if he had to bolt to the bus or whatever. I guess we both just decided to leave it at that as just an accident, but I don't know. I still feel uncomfortable when I pass that particular part of town, and I'm not so sure that that guy didn't trip over us on purpose or something. Again, it's a bit of a foggy memory, and like I said, we don't have all the details, but the way he chased us and the aggression that he used in his voice, I will never forget that. I've never really had any kind of paranormal experience before this, but generally I've always believed that there was more to this life. So, the other week I was sat on my friend's sofa facing his living room door whilst he had his back to it, when I, out of nowhere, saw a long pair of greyish fingers creep around the door, and a woman that I can only describe as the woman from Shutter Island. Literally Google Shutter Island woman and it should show you exactly what I saw. Poked her head around briefly, scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and suddenly turned and disappeared from my line of sight. The weirdest thing is that another friend walked through that door almost instantly after she disappeared and swears blind that there was no one there. I was so sure though that somebody was in the house that we looked in every room twice. I've tripped before years ago, so I know what that feels like, and even then you don't see entities with vivid clarity that I saw her with. The strangest thing is that two of my friends have seen an entity poking its head around doors in different locations, and I spoke to them both separately while holding back most of the story, and both of them filled in the gaps, ensuring me that they're telling the truth. So my question for all of you guys is, should I be worried about this, and how should I deal with her if she returns? This happened about 21 years ago when I was around 9 years old, but I still vividly remember that day. So I was with my grandmother and her dog, a big black Great Dane. We were walking on the side of a little country road in the middle of the woods. It was about a 20-minute walk from my house, and we used to come here for picking up chestnuts a lot. At some point, the dog went a little further into the woods and I started to follow him. At the same time, a car arrived on the road and stopped. I looked at my grandma and she made a sign to tell me to stay where I was. I saw her talking with the driver. He looked like a middle-aged man. From where I was, I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but I heard my grandma raise her voice. I saw the man open his car door. I was sure that he was about to grab my grandmother, and I was terrified. She screamed to me to run into the woods, but a big dark shadow ran into the guy. It was the dog. I think he must have heard the panic in my grandma's voice and that he understood that there was danger. The guy obviously got scared and quickly closed the car door, and then he peeled out of there. I asked my grandmother what happened, and she just told me that he was a crazy man and that we should go home through the woods and stay away from the road. She also told me to stay close to the dog, and thankfully we got home and didn't see the man again. From that day on though, we never went picking up chestnuts in that area again, and we stopped doing the walkings around the house for many years after that too. We never went walking anywhere else without a dog as well, and I think that's also why I remember this day so precisely. And even if I never saw that man again, he left after him a feeling of danger around my home for a very long time. An encounter that was only a few minutes long turned into years of fear and anxiety for all of us. A fun fact too is that, despite his size, that dog was usually a completely harmless dog who basically got scared of everything, even cats or chickens. But that day, he was honestly the bravest dog on Earth. I, a 19-year-old female, have been with my boyfriend, 21 and male, over 4 years now. Throughout our relationship, he told me that he keeps experiencing sleep paralysis, and that it became more and more frequent. He had maybe 1 or 2 the first 3 years, but last year, they definitely kept getting worse. We're both students, and for the past 2 years he's been living in a rented apartment with a good friend of his. Sometimes I spend the night there as well. And one time in May, he told me that he experienced sleep paralysis again, and that he was aware and awake but wasn't able to move or say anything, like his lips were sort of glued together. He said that he tried to scream my name to wake me up so that I could help him, but nothing ever came out of his mouth. He also mentioned that he kept seeing in one of the corners of the room a huge black shadow that made him feel nauseous, and he eventually got out of it and went back to bed. Now, the next day I was still there. He asked me to stay with him in case something happened again, because he starts to get a bit scared by it. I tried to stay awake in case something happened, but I think I immediately fell asleep, which is just like me. Hey, don't judge, I'm weak like that, but this is how I was woken up in the middle of the night. So I heard some sounds and I immediately opened my eyes. And he was my boyfriend, laying on the side with his back at me, resting his head on one hand and saying random stuff in a language that I have never heard before, looking at the exact same corner that he mentioned about when he had the sleep paralysis. I could have swore too that I saw something moving in the corner almost. But the weirdest thing is that it seemed like he was having an actual conversation. He would talk and then stop, like as if somebody was answering, and then he would talk again and so on and so forth. I was like, what the heck is he doing, and called his name. He immediately stopped talking, and then the heaviest silence filled the room for what seemed like an eternity. Then he started hysterically laughing for a few seconds, and then just passed out of nowhere. I checked to see if he was okay, and he started snoring, so at least I knew he fell back to sleep. I wasn't able to sleep that night. I turned around and cried until I saw the light outside. The next day I told him about it, and he apologized for scaring me. I said that it wasn't his fault, but it was clear that he felt bad. We asked his friend if he had heard anything, and he said no, which made me feel like maybe I was just dreaming. But then he added that he woke up as well that night but wasn't able to move. Felt like he couldn't breathe, and claiming that he saw the weirdest shadow in the corner of his room. The apartment, it is consecrated, but I always feel uneasy being there. Another thing I'll add to, although I don't know if it's important or not, but my boyfriend's roommate has nightmares pretty often as well, and would wake up screaming every time. If you've listened to me this long, then thank you. I've always loved paranormal stories and activities and creepy stuff like these, and I was pretty excited to share these with you. Although I will admit that it is another thing altogether to experience it yourself. So I am from Madrid, Spain. My family is from a small mountain city. We're all familiar with the mountains here. Even though I live in Madrid, I always go to hike in the mountain range surrounding Madrid. I would not consider us to be very superstitious and or believe strongly in supernatural events, although I am a huge fan of folklore. But this story, it happened in summer. Back when I was 14 years old, my mother took me and my brother for a week-long trip to a mountain range in the southeast of Spain, close to the old town of Rioja Viejo. We had already spent half of the week going on multiple hikes, and we visited beautiful lakes where me and my brother could swim, despite them being super cold. Overall, we had already had a lot of fun, and we were enjoying our small family trip so far. Now one day, while it was very sunny and warm, we went on a hike again to this kind of, like, abandoned trail, I guess, which some of the locals of the village, they had recommended it. It wasn't accessible by car and there was no phone service. We didn't care though, because we love to spend time in nature, and we would just spend our time walking and talking instead of being on our phones. We found a crystal clear lake at one point, with beautiful turquoise greenish water and lots of water vegetation in it too. My brother and I immediately jumped in, and afterwards we had a picnic for lunch. So far so good, right? Suddenly, while we were enjoying our lunch, we heard a loud scream. It was very high-pitched and sort of just overall scary, I guess. Considering the fact that we were next to the lake, in a small valley between tall mountains, we could hear it kind of echoing. All three of us immediately looked at each other, sort of startled. We were certainly not imagining anything. From what we could deduce, the sound came from the other side of the lake, in a very sort of bushy area, The lake itself was not very big, and we decided to make our way around it to investigate. Because, although we had not seen anyone during the entire day out there, maybe someone was in danger or maybe someone needed help. I cannot really specify what the scream exactly sounded like. In hindsight, it was not your typical scream for help, but who knows what humans are capable of sounding like when in dire need of help, right? Anyway, after a 20-minute walk, we were already getting to the entrance of the bushy area at the other side of the lake, all three of us approaching with our walking sticks in hand and in a cautious position. The first thing that we noticed was an awful smell of rotting flesh that, together with the scream earlier, made us feel a sudden sense of dread. Normally, you would feel welcome when helping someone out, but we didn't feel welcome at all in this place. My instincts were telling me that we should just backtrack our way out of there, while not losing sight of the bushy area, that is. However, we could not shake the feeling that we had to help if someone needed it. So we decided to proceed slowly instead. The joy and the laughter that we had on the other side of the lake was now gone. Whatever was going on at this side of the lake, it felt wrong and ominous. Now, I cannot talk to my brother or mother's behalf, but the hair on my arms was standing on end. And after making our way through the bush for 10 minutes, we finally reached a sort of clearing area. During this whole time, the sense of dread had continued, and the awful smell of rotting flesh had only increased. Finally, in the middle of the clearing, we saw what had caused this smell. In what seemed to be the perfect middle of this small clearing, we found the dead corpse of a deer, or at least what remained from it. The limbs were removed from its torso, and the head was, well, half-eaten. The thing is, though, is that the cadaver looked fairly fresh, as if it was killed that same day. However, the smell was still that of a rotting and decayed corpse, which, I don't know, that did not make any sense. We checked for footprints or dung in the clearing, but we didn't find anything. I guess a logical explanation would be wolves, or maybe even bears, since we have both of them in rural Spain. However, the missing footprints and the way of how this deer was ripped apart made it seem almost unnatural. After we had checked the surroundings, we left as quickly as possible, and on our way back, we did not stop to rest at the lake or anything. We just wanted to get out of there as quickly as we could. Now, when we were leaving the valley behind us, halfway up one of the surrounding mountains, we heard yet another scream, similar to the first one. However, this time, we didn't feel the urgency to check if someone needed help. Instead, we paced up our speed and we didn't go back. Somewhere in the evening, when we finally had made it back to our village, we went for dinner at a small old bar in the picturesque town square. We talked to some of the elder people from the village about our experience with their abandoned trail and all that, and they told us that apparently we had somewhere taken a wrong turn on the trail, since it was not very clear and that this was the reason we ended up at the valley with the lake. They also told us that a few centuries back, during the Spanish Inquisition, the local townspeople had gone to that valley because a so-called witch lived there and set her house on fire, killing the poor old woman. Since then, the locals never hike close to that lake or its surroundings in the valley. A couple of days later, we left to go back home, but we have never been able to shake the feeling of the dread that we experienced that day. Again, we are not superstitious or big believers of the supernatural by any means, but what happened on that day was, well, definitely weird. I was a third shifter in Wisconsin, US, around 2014, who lived about 20 minutes from my workplace in the country. Now, as I was pulling up into the section of the country back road that immediately led into the city, I saw probably the strangest sight that I have ever seen in my life, and I cannot explain it. It was twilight, almost evening, and so the trees were all black against the dark blue sky, and I simply happened to glance up at the top of one of the trees as I was driving, and what I originally thought was the top of the tree flew up into the air at lightning speed and disappeared. It looked like a humanoid thing with wings, but it was so fast that I could barely make out anything else. But it definitely had legs and wings. It just lifted up. The figure with wings that I thought was the top of the tree just flew up and disappeared, lightning fast. I've never seen anything fly that fast. Honestly, it was like a blink. I remember stopping my car outside of my workplace and just sitting there and thinking about what I just saw and wondering if I was crazy or if I imagined it. We don't have any animals or anything natural that looks anything like that, so I have no idea what it was. I decided not to tell my co-workers or anybody ever except until now because, well, it's been about 10 years and it's bothered me this whole time. Do you guys have any ideas as to what this could have been? It was the 3rd day of February 2012 in the Brazilian state of Rio Grande, and this is something I'll never forget. So my sisters, my mother, and me went to have some fun at the beach, pretty far from our home. Our mother had rented the house of a friend for a few days, which we used while going to and coming back from the beach. It was one of those very dirty sort of beach places where trash was dumped all around, and not that many people were going to it. But for us, it was a pretty fun getaway. I even remember joking to my sister that there are probably sharks in this beach. It was a hot day too, and I have the skin of a vampire, so after the first day on the beach, I was looking like Mr. Krabs, and I had to stay in that house while they went to have some fun, which for me was totally okay. I'm kind of introverted anyway. Now one day, my mother and my sister, except for my youngest one, had all gone to go to some specific place. One went to color their nails, the other went to have a massage, two decided to go back to the beach, and my mum was going to go to a club with her friends because she was a boomer or whatever. But my younger sister went to sleep, and basically, it was just me in this 2-floor house, which was way bigger than the home that I was raised in. But the place was kind of creepy, I guess. And it didn't help that the moon that day was full. I was young and a stupid kid, I guess you could say, who was scared to death by creepy nights and also full of energy. So I jumped over the fence of our house by climbing over it. My thoughts at the time were pretty stupid, but I was going to look for my mum. I did that without thinking about stuff like, the possibility of me getting kidnapped or killed by some robber or whatever. This is Brazil, after all. Street crime is high, really high here. Anyway, I walked a little bit around the town, but then I realized that I was lost. I was utterly overwhelmed by the same modern buildings, and I had no idea as to where I was. I also had no idea of where my mum was. I knew the name of the place where she went, but I didn't know how to get there or exactly where that was. After the fear of being lost fully took over, I decided to give up and just go back to the house, but I didn't know where the house was at this point, so I just sort of walked around. There were very few people around that night, and I was way too anxious to ask anyone I saw for help or directions. Eventually, though, the road mixed with this path of dirt. It sort of looked like the path in front of the house that we were staying at, so I thought that I was in the right direction, since I took another path after getting out of the house, but there were several others which this path could lead to. So I walked, and eventually I found a beach. Not the beach where I went with my sisters, but a different one. But little me did not know that, so I ran into the beach because I thought that I could find 2 of my sisters there and they could bring me back home. Obviously, they were not at the beach, but something else was. Now, this beach had these rocks leading up to outside the water. You know those sort of spiked rocks that normally sink ships? Those ones. And one of them was all the way into the sand, and I kept seeing something moving beside it from the corner of my vision. So I just sort of stood there and looked at the rock for a bit. Then, something came out from beside the rock. This thing. It seemed to be about the size of a fully grown man, but it stood straight. It had legs and feet, but whatever it was, it definitely wasn't human. And the biggest proof was the left arm that I saw. So, you know centipedes, right? Those black things with 1,000 legs? Well, this left arm was exactly like that. The thing extended to the ground and it moved like it had a life of its own. I could see all of the legs moving on it too. The whole body of this thing was weird, and not just the centipede arm. You know that green guy from Nightmare Before Christmas? Well, this man was kind of like that, but made of skin and with an egg-shaped head. I don't know what the man did after he saw me, because after seeing him in the clear moonlight, with the ocean backdrop, my child self was absolutely terrified, and I just straight up bolted away from there. I ran away as far and as fast as I could from that beach, never looking back. Eventually, too, while running on this dirt path, one of my sisters, thank the Lord, found me. It looks like they were looking for me for a while, and once we got back to the house, I got scolded real bad by my mother, who was angry as anything with me for running away. She thought that I was kidnapped or something like that and was about to call authorities. I did tell this story to my sisters. Obviously, they found it to be unbelievable. In fact, the only one that believes is the youngest, but she also believes in all that witchcraft stuff, so I guess her belief is sort of already wonky. To be clear with you guys, though, I don't believe in the supernatural stuff like werewolves, Bigfoot, greys, and all that stuff. I think of all of it as just conspiracy theories and stupid beliefs based on zero proof. But to this day, I really do believe that man thing was real. I actually saw it. I wasn't hallucinating. It was there, and it was as real as I was. The memory, it's still very vivid in my mind, and again, I have no idea what it was, but it was real. I saw it, and I'll never forget it. I wouldn't call myself a complete believer of the paranormal, but I'm not someone who writes it off completely either. I'm a skeptic, I guess you could say, that's open and willing to believe if given proof. I have family that is deeply involved with this type of stuff, though, and has their own experiences with the paranormal. I've got a few things that happen to me that I can't entirely explain normally. However, the one that I'm about to describe is by far the one that has no type of logic that can debunk it, at least to my knowledge so far. Now, to better understand my experience, you have to understand the layout of my bathroom for it, because it happened in the shower. On my second floor, there's 4 rooms counting the bathroom. You walk up the stairs and you'll see one room straight across from the base of the stairs, while 2 rooms, they follow the wall on the right to said room, finishing with a room mirroring the one at the base of the stairs. Once you enter the bathroom, immediately to the right is my sink and mirror. The sink is about maybe 4-ish feet off the ground. Next to the sink is my bath or shower, blocked by a wall so it doesn't connect to my sink. Straight across from the door is the toilet, and I had my door closed, no one else in the bathroom, nor any pets. Since my shower is also a bathtub, there's a ledge where me and my family members will keep shampoos, body washes, etc., etc., etc. And I began to wash my hair, place the shampoo on the ledge. As I go to put it down, I placed it a bit too close to the edge and it fell off. I heard the bottle roll around a bit and ultimately come to a stop. I think, oh well, I'll just grab it when I get out. I I begin to finish up in the shower, get out to grab my towel, blah blah blah. I look on the ground to find the shampoo bottle, but I can't. I sort of look around for a little while, and after a few seconds of searching, I look up to see the bottle sitting perfectly on the sink. Again, the sink is about 4 feet off the ground, and it's away from the shower altogether. I heard it rolling on the ground, and there's a wall separating my bath and sink. I have asked my family members if they did it or someone was just messing with me, but to this day, no one has claimed to have done it. And to be honest, I think I would have heard someone or seen them perhaps if they had come in. So, does anyone here have any form of explanation for this? I'm still scratching my head over it, and it really, really freaks me out. So this story takes place close to 20 years ago at this point. I was spending a lot of time with my friends Danny and Kate. We were all sitting on Danny's couch watching TV one day. Danny says I'm bored and let's do something. As we suggest things, I say, "Hey, have you guys ever heard of the smelter?" For background, this all takes place in Arizona, Prescott to be exact, and the smelter is located in Humboldt, Arizona. It is very old, late 1800s I think. It used to process metals, I should say, but we start driving out there, smoking cigarettes and listening to music. We arrive and I start telling them how we hung out here every weekend in junior high. My best friend at the time, Mike, lived in Humboldt, so we would take girls to the smelter and just drink, usual kid stuff. Nothing even remotely weird ever happened back then, so I guess that's why I was totally unprepared for what was going to unfold. We approached the outside of the smokestack, and I noticed that the stairs had finally been ripped down. I guess whoever owned the property was sick of punk kids entering. I say, guess someone finally took the stairs out. I then explained the holes every couple of feet in the catwalk, how they must have used the holes to shovel the ash. Giving up on entering, we moved to the side, and after what I'm about to tell you, I'm glad that we couldn't get in. I mean, someone definitely would have been hurt. So, we're outside for about 15 minutes being loud and just joking around. Then it suddenly got really quiet and still, and thousands of bats came screeching out of the windows of the smelter. I mean, an absolutely ridiculous amount of them. I say to them, "We've been standing out here making noise for close to 20 minutes. We didn't scare those bats." And right when I said that, we heard a sort of loud thud hit the ground, like something heavy fell down a porthole, and then silence. Our eyes widened, nobody said anything, and another thud, then one more, and to this day, I will never be able to explain this next bit. We started hearing the loudest screeches like ever. Dust started flying up like a bird was dying on the ground, but nothing was there. They circled us getting closer, and all we could really do was huddle closer together. It was like we forgot that we could run, I guess, but I forgot who ran first. I kind of remember being out of it, but not thinking correctly, I guess. But anyways, we ran, and the first thing Danny said was, if someone told me that story, I would never believe them. We eventually ran back, and we just got out of there. Anyways, if anyone has any leads, the rumor is that a girl was apparently killed here, but I could never confirm that. I always thought that it was an urban legend, but after this happened, there's something wrong with that place, and I don't know what it is. When I was 13 or 14, I'm 20 now, I used to go to Park at Open Gym. Basically, I went there for a few days, saw a girl there almost my age for several days. Then one day I just gathered courage and I asked her about directions, just an excuse to talk with her. Then we started talking. Then eventually we kind of became friends. I don't even remember a bit what we talked about, besides the direction question. The only weird thing is that no one ever used to look at her besides me. She only ever talked to me. She didn't used to go to school either. Not like I have a weak memory about anything too, but it just isn't there. Then she asked me to go for a walk. I went behind her and we started running or racing. Then she stopped me in the middle of the race and said, "Let's not go there, weird guys sit there." Which was true, a part of that park is filled with people who do drugs and alcohol and stuff. But I told her it's fine to come with me, and we did, and no one stopped us. We started running in circles on that park, and then the next day I came again and she was there doing some exercise on that open gym. I went near her and said hi. Then we started talking about something, which I really can't think of again, but she used to like talking with me, so she was showing some interest. Eventually I had a mobile phone. I handed her paper with my number and she took it. Then we again went for that run and said bye to each other and went back home. The thing that happened here though is that she called me the next day at exactly 12:02 a.m. and said that she wanted to see me and asked to come out. Then I had to cut the call because my mum asked who's there. I told her that it was the wrong number and I went to sleep. Obviously I wasn't allowed to go outside around that time, but then the next day I gathered some courage again and called that number back during the afternoon. The exact same number. I told her that someone called me, a girl, and they said that he owns the number and doesn't have any daughter. In fact, he didn't even live close to that area because I asked him. Then I went to the park for more than a week, and it was regularly around that time that she was always there, but I never saw her again. No one talked about her too, and she never told me her house, nothing. She sort of just disappeared. Was she grounded by her parents, or did I just experience something weird? I'm not too sure, but what I do have is a recording of me walking, but I thought that she was there, but in the recording, there's no one. So I guess my question is, did I hallucinate this? Am I going crazy? But I still have her number, or the number at least that I called back that I swore that she spoke to me on. I don't know. The whole thing freaks me out, and to be honest with you, I just want to forget about it. I was about 16 years old, and I lived with my family in Levine, Arizona. The family at the time consisted of me, my two younger brothers, my mom, and my stepdad. So it was late at night, or early in the morning, I guess you could say. I had gotten out of bed upstairs, since we had a 2-story house, and I went downstairs to get some food. Eventually, my middle brother, who would have been about 13, came down too. We ultimately decided to watch some TV in the living room, so we stayed downstairs. I needed to use the restroom, so I excused myself and went to the half bath in the hall leading to our garage and laundry. My stepdad, he came downstairs and he told my brother to go to bed before sounding confused. "Who was in this bathroom?" he asked. "I am," I answered. From what my brother told me, he took a step back in shock. I then heard him say, "I saw you upstairs. You stood outside your room when I left mine, stared at me, and then walked into your room." Eventually, we all left the living room and returned to our rooms, terrified. We had also been finding handprints at the time next to my baby brother's room. So maybe the thing that pretended to be me was also peeking into my brother's room occasionally. But the way the handprints were, it seemed like they stood in front of my room and peeked into the baby's room. I cannot be completely sure about that, but we definitely saw the handprints and we have no idea how they got there. This happened close to 12 years ago when I was about 16 years old in North Las Vegas. To this date, I've never had such a thing happen to me again, but it's a moment that I will never forget, and I figured that I'd share it with all of you guys who might be interested. I would like to add that I'm somewhat of a healthy skeptic, I guess you could say, and not really religious, though I am open to the idea of higher powers and anomalies and all that. Now, my older brother and I were at a house party, and when the time came for my brother to leave, I insisted on staying, knowing that I would have to walk home eventually since he was my ride. Mind you, we didn't live very far, maybe a mile or two at most. Fast forward to me leaving though, and I was on my way walking home. I had a nice buzz, but I definitely wasn't impaired to the point of having my vision or motor functions affected in any way that I can't blame this on. I know the whole 3 a.m. thing is super cliche, but it definitely was around that time frame, so I'm going to go ahead and say that when I started walking home, it was probably around 2ish. The streets were wide and almost no cars to be seen. I know as a woman it's different, but as a guy I actually took comfort in cars passing at this time because for that small window, I felt like I wasn't alone walking when they were passing, if that makes sense. Anyway, the journey was eerie, but I made it to the entrance of my neighborhood. Unfortunately, my house was basically at the opposite end of this winding road, yet still a straight shot, so I had just a little ways to go at this point. Nonetheless, I knew these streets and safety was definitely on the horizon. The houses are fairly sized, I guess you could say, and as I'm walking down the sidewalk, between each house there's basically an alleyway of darkness. In the day it would be a walking path, perhaps to the backyards with, electric meters on the walls of the houses and AC units and all that. But at night, these alleys are pretty much pitch black when you look far enough. Now, as I'm walking down the sidewalk, I can't help but glare in between each house and start getting in my head and tripping myself out from my imagination. I try to slow down my roll mentally since I'm alone and stay en route. No cars have passed in a while, thus no comfort. I continue like this down the street until my house is finally in sight down the way. Obviously, I felt a little bit better with my destination now in view. Then a car comes north from the direction of my house, and I'm on the right-hand sidewalk with the road to my left, so I thought, sweet, another human to see me home, be it for just a moment. It was then when this car passed me, and after the flash of the lights, that I saw what I saw. Already looking towards the street, after the car passed on my left, something grabbed my attention in the corner of my eye, crossing the street towards me. The street lights were those yellowish ones, so the street was lit just enough for me to see it. And at first, honestly, I thought it was a dog, so I glanced directly at it. And what I saw initially, if I had to describe it, was what almost seemed to be a black silhouette of a little boy trotting towards me. I don't know if you've ever seen those typical little statues of toddlers, like in a garden section of a store, curly hair and all in a swing or whatnot. But if I had to describe the black silhouette, it resembled that of a little boy, I guess. I'm an avid gamer, so I guess I would assume that I know when to lock it in, but when this thing caught my eye with a raised brow after the car passed it, was when I did a double take to confirm what I had just seen, and I completely lost it. I remember turning directly towards it, after the glare of the headlights, after any factor that I could have blamed it on passed, for but just a second or two, enough for me to analyze it. And there it was, a shadowy little boy trotting towards me with no features, around 2.5, maybe 3 feet tall. The moment, and I mean the moment that I consciously accepted that this was happening, I literally gasped, already turning my body, and yelled as I took off full sprint towards my house. I kid you not too, it felt like I was passing a house every 2 strides, never ran so quickly in my life. And as I'm running trying to collect myself, I literally reminded myself of what had just happened, and it was like I put on the turbos. I genuinely felt like it was right behind me up until this point. I was already running as fast as I could, but my survival instinct said otherwise. I never looked back once, and I ran all the way to my house, and thank God that they left the front door open for me. I literally slammed the door behind me, and there was my dad and brother, still awake, reclined, and watching TV. I'll be 29 this August, but I remember this night vividly, and it still gives me chills when I recall this moment. I've never really shared this with, well, pretty much anyone, and you're free to believe it or not if you want. Regardless, it's still somewhat of a relief that I can finally get this off my chest. I appreciate you if you've taken the time to hear this out, and I would be happy to answer any questions in the comments below if you have any. And if anyone who has listened to this has any ideas as to what this is, then please do share it, because I would really like to know. So growing up, there was this little red shack in the woods behind my friend's house, about a mile down from my childhood home. It was really small, like the size of a garden tool shed or an outhouse maybe. The neighborhood kids, they would tell my brother and I that there was a strange hermit who lived there who ate snakes and skunks, and we thought that they were just being kids telling scary stories. Well, just recently at Easter dinner, I was telling my parents about the hermit guy story, that my boyfriend and I went to look for this shack again and couldn't find it. I thought that maybe I'd imagined seeing it as a kid, but apparently it was real. And my parents, they knew this guy. He used to be well known and respected in the community, and was very successful at one point, until something happened. My dad said that one time while my dad, was slowly driving around the potholes on our road, this man ran out of the woods and jumped into the bed of his truck and ducked down, and my dad really didn't know what to do, so he just kept driving. After a few miles down the road, the man jumped out of the bed of the truck and went, well, wherever he went. This was how he got around town apparently, forced hitchhiking or whatever, and did this to people a lot. Then my mum said that when she worked at the grocery store many years ago, he would come in and buy raw hamburger and a bag of sugar, sit outside of the store, mix it together, and eat it. There are a few other things that they said that I forgot, but what had happened was this guy's mother died apparently. He found her and couldn't accept her death, so he had kept her body in the house for a few months. It deeply affected his mental health, seeing her body decay like that, and he went from very successful to living in a shack in the woods. As far as I know, he wasn't violent or dangerous, just very unpredictable and unstable in a sort of non-dangerous way, I guess. He eventually ended up in a care home where he passed away within the last couple of years. I do hope that this hermit guy ended up in heaven. I heard that he was a really nice guy before his life went downhill, and while his behavior was very unsettling, I don't think he ever hurt anybody, and didn't deserve to have the second half of his life end the way that it did. One thing that I question now, though, is, are the stories that those kids were telling, are they true? This encounter happened about 12 years ago now, but it still makes me feel incredibly uneasy. At the time, I lived in our family home with my parents and two brothers. I had a lot of very strange and unexplainable things happen in this house, but this was by far the strangest. The house, it was a 3-story, and the attic had been converted into my brother's bedroom. I came out of the bathroom on the 2nd floor to see a figure sort of rush past and run up the stairs to the attic. On the way, we had some boxes stacked up that had been knocked over in the rush. I walked straight to the boxes to stack them back up again, and as I did, I looked up the attic stairs to find someone stood there. The staircase was dark, but I could clearly see one of my brothers stood a few steps up there. At the time, my brothers looked very similar, same hairstyle, same build, same height even. So it was really hard to determine which one of them that it was, but for a few seconds we just sort of stood there and stared at each other in silence. But before my eyes could adjust to the dark to see who it was, he ran further up the stairs and into the bedroom. I heard his feet hitting the ground all the way upstairs, which made me feel uneasy as they didn't sound familiar, I guess. My brothers both have very heavy, distinct footsteps, so I could always tell who was coming before even seeing them. I didn't really question what had happened, but something just didn't really feel right, I guess. I had this chill running through me and a sinking feeling in my stomach. In any case, I made my way downstairs, and all I could think of was, which one of them is wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt today, as that is distinctively what I saw him wearing. I got downstairs and peered into the kitchen, and when I did, my stomach completely dropped, because our entire household was in the kitchen. Both of my brothers were there, both wearing shorts and colorful t-shirts. There was nobody else in the house too, so who the heck was that? It's not just the fact that I saw someone, but I heard them too. I can't describe it, but I literally felt their presence, and why did it look like my siblings? Why did it stop to stare at me and then just run away like that? Did it want me to follow it? And what would have happened if I did? So, there were these two guys that came into my work not long ago. It was normal, really, until my coworker pointed out that the two guys were staring at me very intensely. They were non-stop staring and even turning their heads to stare at me. They were not hiding it at all, is what I'm getting at. And the stare was very predatory-like and made me extremely uncomfortable. It was like they were watching my every move. Every time I would look in their direction, they would still be staring. For context too, I work at a restaurant and we have bottomless drinks. They ordered food and had eaten it, but kept on refilling their drinks, staying at the table for at least 4 hours, which is highly unusual as customers will typically spend 45 minutes on average or less there, as we're sort of like a fast food restaurant, I guess. One guy was on his computer, though, and the other was on his phone, sometimes, but the majority of the time they were both just staring at me. They were barely talking to each other and were almost silent. One of the guys left at some point, but the other was still waiting there until I had to clock out. The guy also asked me a few questions when he asked me for ice cream, that being where I'm from, because apparently I looked foreign to him and asking if I came from Spain. It was pretty unusual to say the least, but when I left the restaurant and I turned around, the guy was right behind me, so I panicked and sort of stopped. The guy walked past me and I walked in the opposite direction, calling my mum, and thankfully I got home safe. I am nervous about this though, and I'm feeling very uncomfortable. And although nothing really happened, I guess, I'm worried that this isn't the end of this. My gut feeling is telling me that they had bad intentions. And so my question for all of you guys is, well, what should I do? I was up at 3:50 a.m. this morning on my phone, and I decided to put it down and go to sleep eventually. But not even 5 minutes later, I hear sort of shuffling upstairs outside of my door, and for some reason I decided to grab my knife because it was a little bit too weird at this time. Laying in my bed, my door slowly opens super quietly, and I ask what's up, thinking it was my roommate, and he replies, "Oh, nothing." I couldn't tell you if I'd heard that voice anywhere ever, but all I saw was a hooded black figure. He then slowly cracks my door back, but he doesn't close it, so I'm freaking out. I shoot up out of bed to open it, and when I do, he's gone. I cleared the upstairs and saw that our front door was open still when I went downstairs. But the only other roommate who didn't lock this door was wide open, but he closed it before he went to sleep too. Mind you, nothing was stolen, and why he would be coming in our house and stealing nothing, I have no idea. Thank God nothing happened, but it just doesn't make much sense. About a month ago, I'm assuming that the same person opened our front door and took off after seeing us awake. The doors, they will be overly locked from now on for sure, but I don't know, something tells me that this isn't over and that whoever this is, that they'll be back. This was about 5 years ago, and it still creeps me out. I'm a female and was 18 at the time. I'm now 23, and I was walking home from work at the local pizza joint and took my usual route home. It was about 9:45 to 10:15 p.m, and it was super dark that night. As I'm getting about 100 yards away from the street that I live on, a white van turns onto the street suddenly. Nothing too suspicious, but something just didn't sit right with me, so I yanked out my earbuds and paused my music. I then turned down my street, and as I'm getting closer to my house, I started getting a weird gut feeling. I look up from my phone as I was about to text my roommate, who was out of town at the time, that I was almost home, about 15 yards or so at this point. And as I look up, I notice the white van sitting in front of my house, and the man inside is just sort of staring at me, the yellow car light shining on his face. He had brown hair, glasses, and facial hair. His van lights, they were off, but his car was running. I stopped and put my back to a tree in my neighbor's yard and just sort of stood there, maintaining eye contact with this man. After what must have been about 5 minutes, he starts driving towards the stop sign at the end of the road. I didn't turn my back to him at any point. I kept my back to the tree and maintained visual on the van the entire time until it stopped at the stop sign. He just sat there for another 2 or 3 minutes, seemingly looking in his rearview mirror at me. All the while, I'm not looking away and my back is still on the tree. Finally, though, he turned right, the direction in which I had come from, and after about 20 seconds of making sure that he or anybody else wasn't coming, I bolt to my house instantly. I quickly get inside and lock the door. I go to the window and very quietly look through the blinds. I didn't turn on any lights because, well, I'm not that stupid. And after a few seconds of looking, what do you know? He drove back up and down the street again and then left. Afterwards, I texted my roommate what had happened, and then went to each and every one of the windows in my house to make sure that they were locked, along with the back door and the garage door too. I made sure to keep all the lights off for the remainder of the night. I didn't sleep a lick that night at all. I was so paranoid at every sound or movement. And after that, I never did walk home ever again. So I'm going to start this by saying that I always had a weird feeling in certain rooms of the house that I live in. It feels like goosebumps, I guess, but only concentrated on one point of my body. I really never thought much about it before. I kind of just thought that I was just cold, even in summer in the blazing heat, which is weird, I know, but that quickly changed when I changed rooms with my parents, who, for some reason, really wanted to move out of their room in our house. So, it all started when I was 16 years old. I started to feel like I was getting watched while playing video games, to the point where I had to turn around and take a look. Seeing nothing but the darkness of my room, I didn't think much of it. But then my dog started acting weird, barking towards my doors and growling when they were open. Also, nothing, and I mean nothing, could get this dog in the rooms. 2 weeks after my dog started acting like this, doors would just randomly be wide open at a 90-degree angle. I obviously took pictures to be 100% sure that I'd closed them, but they were wide open every single time. I rarely open my window, and there is little to no airflow in my room strong enough to open these doors too. After that, doors started slamming and reopening in front of me. It all got worse too when, after a few months, objects started falling off of my desk and on my shelves and all that, and friends of mine started having panic attacks in my room. I would hear footsteps outside and inside of my room at night, and often had the feeling like somebody was sitting on my bed. Thankfully, I'm not the only person who experienced those things in my room. In fact, I have witnesses for most of the said things. But still, to this very day, sometimes, whatever it is, it comes back to show me that it is still there. I had first moved to Portland from Minneapolis in November of 2022, and this instance happened late winter, early spring of 2023. At the time, I was living with my aunt, and it was around 1 a.m. Everybody was in bed, and I was in the living room playing the new Hogwarts Legacy game. All lights turned off except for the cast of the TV when, all of a sudden, I just get a violent chill up my spine, and every hair on my body stands straight up. I immediately break into a cold sweat, and I imagine that this is what prey feels like when something was locked on. My eyes immediately go towards the dark kitchen hallway, and I swear to you that I see long dark fingers wrap around the corner, and my breathing stops as I'm watching this happen in sort of slow motion. I know what happens next, and I see the head pop around the corner shortly after I make out the hand, and I am staring into just a completely black face of darkness. And I know it's staring right back at me, but as soon as it looked around the corner, it went back around, never to be seen again. I'm shaking at this point, but feeling like it was looking for someone specific and not finding them, like I wasn't who they were hoping to encounter. I really don't know, and granted, at this time I was living with people who unfortunately stayed within stagnant negative energy, and I cleansed myself as much as possible and tried not to engage in their constant stuff, but this isn't the first time that I've seen shadow people, but this is the first time that I've looked one in the face like that, and I absolutely do not recommend. So around 2007 to 2008, placing me around 5 years old, possibly 6, I was still in one of those transforming cribs, with a portion that could drop down and turn it into a toddler bed. This left the bed rather high off the floor, and at the time I lived in southern Arizona. Now, late in the night, or very early stages of the morning, one night, at around midnight to 3 o'clock, I was awoken by something grabbing at my ankle, feeling long sharp nails sort of digging in. Like stiletto-style nails from the now fragmented memories I still have of the night that this thing looked like a stereotypical witch. Wrinkled, wart-riddled face with a long nose and rotting teeth. It never spoke, but it did manage to pull me off the bed and under it. It startled me, understandably so, right? And it put a single finger up to its lips in the shushing motion. It never changed and simply vanished from the sight as the sun began to rise, and I guess I was just so freaked out that I never spoke about it, although my parents did find me under the bed in the morning. It wasn't some weird dream based on a memory, as at the time I wasn't a huge fan of any media with witches. It was a pretty hard set Lilo and Stitch kid already. Plus, when I got up in the morning, my parents also noticed that I had digging in marks in my skin where this witch had grabbed me. So So, I've had many encounters throughout my life living by a graveyard. Literally, right on the other side of the property line is a graveyard. We've had spirits come in all the time, and once I watched them touch one of my dogs when the dog wasn't expecting it, freaking out. I saw a shadow, and then I told them to get out of here to be respectful of the dogs. I've also been seeing apparitions around the house lately, and feeling certain energies, I guess, but nothing dangerous. But we do have something that loves the dogs, and also is a bit of a prankster. Well, tonight I get home from the bar a lot earlier than usual. I go grab my pup to get her into the room. She usually goes right for the bed, and sometimes I'll grab some water or some sort of snack or whatever. I went to go and get a drink, and that was when I heard her growl. I felt someone in here when I got in, but I figured they'd get the hint to leave us because I don't give the most welcoming presence, I guess you could say. But my poor pup was so scared of this thing that they busted a window out of my hallway door and ran into the back room. Now, she knows she's in trouble for the window, and I know she scared herself a bit with that, but she was too scared to go back into that room, and I have never heard her growl like that either. And so, what type of protections can we put up around the yard to ward off any of these spirits? My family is Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic, aka non-practicing, so they do their stuff, but I genuinely think that we need more. I don't want these things on my property scaring everything, especially the animals. Every single animal that we have is a rescue one and has come out of some pretty rough situations, and we're trying to lessen the stress, not make it worse. So, for some context, it was about 9:10 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time in regional Australia, and I was sitting on a tyre swing at a mate's house just looking down at the phone when I put it down to see a shadowy figure that looked 3D until a normal shadow sitting next to my friend's neighbour's car in their carport shelter. They were about twice the height of the car and completely pitch black. They had sort of Arby's mitten man sort of hands with two big fat arms and a skinny body. The head looked very round on the top and slimmed down at the mouth. The lights, they turned off, and I instantly went into fight or flight mode and ran back to their patio where I was completely out of breath and just sort of rattled down to my core. I tried telling people, and they say that no one was there and that you were imagining it. Mind you, I am mentally stable with no noticeable symptoms of anything in the schizophrenic disorders umbrella, and take no medication that led to hallucinations or anything. I'm an Aboriginal man, and shadow people in our culture are evil spirits who have come to kill you, because in the past it goes that they had fights with their ancestors, and they see you as the person to carry out all this legacy stuff on, so they try to harm you. I still don't know what it was, to be honest, and it was just, well, plain scary to see it. I moved in with my sister and her ex in a little renovated garage unit made into a living room or kitchen area, a one bed and bath in Berea, Kentucky. She told me that it was haunted because she would hear footsteps and noises coming from the living room when no one was home but her. From the get-go, too, that place felt just off, I guess. Everyone always got the heavy feeling of being watched, everywhere else but the bedroom, that is, including the bathroom. One day, too, I told Henry that we didn't like when he stared at us, especially in the shower, and not to be a perv. That they only used the bedroom and the facilities when necessary, so there was no furniture in the living room. So when the neighbor gave me a couple of wooden chairs, I brought them over to the house. My sister, she didn't want them there, but I still just sort of sat them against the wall and went about my day. Well, the next time that I went into the living room, one of the chairs had been moved to the middle of the floor, underneath the ceiling fan. I asked if anyone had moved it, and she mouthed off, "I don't even want them here. Why would I fool with them?" So I just placed them back against the wall. And the next time that I went in there, it happened again. Now, we had heard rumors about a man hanging himself in there, and I suppose that just about sums it up, right? Also, one night my sister had her friend Matilda over and we were all sitting on the bed in a triangle. Her friend and I were at the foot of the bed. We were just talking when I saw a quarter-sized black orb float from in front of the wall, up over the top of the blinds, and then disappear. The blinds were closed and it was nighttime, so it wasn't a headlight or anything. I stopped talking and said I just saw something, and Matilda said that she saw it too, and elaborated exactly what I had just seen. We also always had bad dreams there as well, and it was a weird place. On another occasion, I was spending the night with my friend Raspberry at her brother Michael's house. Their other brother Spaulding, her boyfriend Barney, and 2 cats were also there. It was around 11 p.m. when she broke out her glow-in-the-dark Ouija board with the light-up planchette, and we all head up to the upstairs to the closet, including the cats, leaving no one or nothing to debunk our experience that I'm about to tell you about. But we were all very serious about playing it, and wouldn't have goofed off at all. So we sit down, light a few candles, and we begin asking if there's anyone there who would like to speak to us. We get a yes and all look at each other. We play on asking random questions, and I remember the last question being, "Are you in the house?" "No," it reads. Then immediately after that, we hear a really loud bang downstairs. We sort of say bye, but I admit that it wasn't the best one, but we pushed the planchette to goodbye and burst out of the closet and down the stairs to find that the pan that we had used to make biscuits earlier, and obviously left out on the top of the stove, had been completely thrown across the room, now sitting in the living room of all places. Safe to say, our adrenaline was pumping for a while that night, because that was seriously one of the most incredible things that I had ever seen. Later that night too, it was just Michael and I playing another round on the Ouija board, and we asked the spirit, "Are you human?" and it said no. And that was when the scratching on the closet door began, then banging and scratching as if something was desperately trying to get in. Like I said, we were all very serious about it and wouldn't have messed around. Besides, someone always fesses up to it at some point when they do play a prank like that, but in this case, no one ever did. We left the closet to find rather deep claw marks on it too, and that was the last time that I ever played on a Ouija board. This morning, I woke up as I normally did at around 6 a.m. I picked up my phone and started messaging my friends, and I was watching some videos as I normally did. Around 10 minutes in my peripheral vision, I then see a woman walk through my doorway. At first, I didn't bat an eye. I thought it was just my brain playing tricks on me, so I looked to its direction, and when I did, my heart dropped to my stomach. It didn't disappear. It was a woman, not a shadow figure, but a woman who I didn't recognize, who was very tall, around 50 years old as it looked, had long ginger curly hair, whose head was tilted sort of slightly, and who was just staring emotionlessly at me. I stared in utter paralyzing fear for what must have been around 3 seconds before I blinked and she was gone. At that point, I was frozen in bed, and my phone dropped on the floor for a solid minute before I sort of finally snapped out of it and threw my duvet off and sprinted down the stairs to wake up my parents like an 8-year-old. At that point, I was on the border of bursting in tears. My parents said that I was just tired, and they told me to go back upstairs. It was only later that morning that they actually took me seriously. It's also important to mention that at that time, I was not tired and was for sure not dreaming or daydreaming or anything. So are there any possible explanations for this? Am I going crazy? Please do let me know so that I can stop thinking about this, as I'm pretty shaken up. Also, After some research, I did discover that the previous owner of this home had passed away at the age of 67, and it turns out that the woman was quite tall, had long ginger curly hair, and stayed in this home for 24 years. The images that I saw of this woman, they pretty much matched perfectly with what I remember seeing. What really creeps me out though about this is that what I saw was a full human. Not any sort of ghostly or shadowy figure. It was probably the woman's lost spirit or whatever walking around the home, but I actually saw her, a full body apparition like that. It's terrifying to go through something like this, and if you have any advice as to what I can do about it, then please do let me know. This happened in 2019. I was 25 at the time. I was living with my parents, sister, and my partner, as we were saving up to buy a house at this point. My parents' house was in a relatively big city in California, which has a big homeless population. The house was on a street that dead end to a park, which was a common hangout spot for homeless people. There were always homeless people walking by our house, of which most of them never caused any problems. Now, the other piece of backstory that you need to know before I get into this is that my sister is special needs. She, despite being 19 at the time, appeared both physically and mentally more like a 10-year-old, I guess you could say. This particular day, my mum and I had taken our dogs to the vet. My partner was at work, and my dad was working in the backyard. This left my sister kind of alone in the house. When my mum and I came back from the vet, my sister opened the door and greeted us, saying, "This is my friend Julia." And behind her stood a woman who looked like she was probably in her 20s. She had my sister's socks on and was eating food from our house. This was confusing because the woman could have been a friend of my sister's, as she was in a lot of programs for adults with special needs, and we didn't necessarily know all of her friends. But my sister also has a limited vocabulary to explain situations with. So my mum says, "Oh, you know my daughter?" Julia says, "We're getting to know each other." And that was a huge nope. My mum says, "How are you getting to know her?" Julia answers, "Oh, well, I just live on the corner." "You live around the corner?" "No, I live on the corner. I needed a tampon, so your daughter let me in." At this point, my mum is speechless. I've never seen her speechless, in fact, in my life, and I'm whispering to her, "Get her out." Julia is kind of pacing around grabbing more food from our kitchen. She's acting erratically like she's on drugs. I again tell my mum to get her out. My mum says, "I know that, but if she has a knife or a gun or something, I need to do it carefully." My mum follows Julia into the kitchen and says, "I'm so sorry, you need to leave because I need to go run an errand." Julia, she ignores this request. At this point, I look in our bathroom where there is a pile of Julia's things. Again, my mum tells her that she needs to leave. Julia agrees and goes into our bathroom and locks the door. She was in there for a while. It felt like forever, in fact, but maybe it was around 5 minutes. We were pretty certain that she was doing drugs in there, but finally Julia has all of her stuff and she leaves, taking socks and snacks with her. I run to get my dad and we all debrief. It seems like, from what we can get out of my sister, is that Julia knocked on the door and asked for a tampon, in which my sister lets her in, trying to be helpful. Julia then realizes that she's practically alone with what looks like a child and takes full advantage, stealing clothes and shoes from us. We have a serious talk with my sister and tell her that she can never open doors for strangers like that ever again. And we spend the next few months worrying that Julia spread the news that our house was an easy house to get into. This happened in northwest Houston. I've never really spoken about this one, as much as I had a much more frightening experience that takes precedence in my memory. But this one, it is weird enough to ask you guys what happened. So, I've only had one other paranormal experience, and after doing some research, I believe it was demonic. Well, there was another experience around the same time, within a few months of each other, and no paranormal experiences before or after these two, where me and my middle school friend were having a sleepover. We got a craving for snacks and decided to walk to the closest gas station. The walk was about 1.5 miles and included a walk through the woods behind our neighborhood. We cut across the creek and turned right, which led to a road, but the road was at least 3/4 mile away with dense woods on both sides of us. As we're walking, we were about 1/4 mile into this long stretch of woods. All of a sudden, this giant white figure steps out of the woods to our left. We both freeze in our tracks without saying a word, confirming that we both saw it, and it stopped and stared right at us. It was probably about 50 to 60 feet away from us, but it was absolutely massive. So it seemed a bit closer than that, I suppose, but I got instantly flooded with chills, and we both turned around and started sprinting back to where we crossed the creek, repeatedly saying, "What was that?" We never looked back out of pure fear, and all we could seemingly do was just, well, run. Whatever it was, though, it was built like a human, I guess, standing on 2 legs and had distinct yellowish eyes. It was easily, and I mean easily, 9 feet tall, and we don't have any sort of animals that would have resembled that in the area. Me and that old friend, we lost touch, unfortunately. This was like 14 years ago, but I really wish I could reach out to him to talk about that moment again, because I know that he still remembers it just like I do. But can anyone add some insight? I find it sort of weird that I had 2 paranormal experiences within months of each other, and nothing before or since then. I get chills just talking about this and reliving that memory, but I'm really curious if anyone has any ideas. Just to clarify too, we were not drunk, high, or anything, stone cold sober. We were too young at the time to do any of that stuff yet, and so there was nothing like that involved. So again, if you have any idea as to what this was, then please do let me know. So my dad once told me that coming home from grocery shopping with my grandma at the time left him with an eerie feeling one day. He was around 16 to 17 at the time and was walking home with my grandma after groceries. Mind you, the store that they went to was down the street and had been around until last year, until it burned down, so it was like a 3 to 5 minute walk home. Once they got home, they noticed that the front door was open. My grandma got scared by that and decided to tell the neighbor to come and inspect the inside of the home for any stolen items or anybody in there, obviously. The neighbor's boyfriend and my dad, they went inside and nothing was stolen. But the fridge was wide open though, with food on the table. The TV was not stolen, but tampered with as the wires were all sort of unplugged. My dad continued to check all the rooms before getting to his, and when entering, he noticed no changes except for his bed, stating that he saw 4 figures made out of tinfoil placed on his bed. Considering that he was around an older teen, this made him feel really unsettled. His youngest sibling was 15 and was not known to enjoy toys of such, and his other siblings, the oldest around 22 or 23, was already in college. I don't know why, but my dad never told my grandma of what he found in my room or my neighbor's boyfriend, so when they went outside to inform my grandma everything was okay, nothing else really happened until, well, later that night. My grandparents' house, now, is divided into 2 as it's a huge property, but at that time it wasn't. My grandpa and uncle were now home from school and work. My grandma finished cooking dinner, and all of them ate together, finished, and then ordered my dad to take out the trash. My dad followed and grabbed whatever trash needed to be taken out and went outside. Now, the house has a really long car driveway that almost makes as a hallway on the side of my grandparents' house to now the second house. But again, at the time, there was no second house, so my dad went down that hallway, and once he got closer to the back gate, he froze. What he saw was a man, particularly shorter than any average height, with pale skin, almost albino, that's what my dad said anyway, staring at him as he sat on the gate with a huge smile on his face. My dad made no attempt to get into contact with the man, no odd faces in return or words or anything, and just sort of watched him. He said that he stared and smiled for a good second until waving at him and jumping off the gate, leaving his property. My dad doesn't know if this was the man who tampered with the house or some random trying to scare him, etc. All he knows is that it scared him half to death upon seeing him. Now, when I was 8 to 10, I was playing outside of my grandparents' house with my cousin, who now lived in the back house. My grandparents' house is elevated, and so are all the ones on that street. They all have stairs that lead up to the house, and I was on the top of the stairs, the porch area, and my cousin was on the bottom on the front yard. We played catch back and forth from these positions. Sometimes soccer as well, as we would use the front house door as a goal line. We often switched who would be on the porch and who was on the floor and all that, and I was on the porch when I threw the ball at him and noticed a man in the house across the street staring at me, smiling at me. I thought that was a bit weird, but I didn't think much of it as my grandparents knew everyone in the neighborhood, so I thought that it must have been a family friend or something. I continued playing and didn't tell my cousin, but the man just kept staring at me. I started feeling uncomfortable as I felt like he was looking right at me, not around me, but directly at me. What made it worse too was that he was looking at me from the attic window of the house. I felt sort of disturbed by his smile and just how large he seemed to me. I told my cousin to switch, and he did. He didn't seem to notice the man. We switched back, and this continued on, and so did the man. I believe it was for like 3 hours that we played outside, and the man smiled and stared at me for the entire time. My brother and all of us really loved my grandparents' house, so much so that we stayed for weeks during the summer or any opportunity that we really got. This was the case with my youngest brother as well. He decided to sleep over one day, and he was fairly young at the time, around 5, and still needed my grandmother to put him to bed. He wanted to sleep in the living room, which was new because when we were younger, he always wanted to be in my grandparents' room, which left my other brother and I to the couches. Anyways, he and Grandma slept in the living room couch, the one closest to the window and the front door. The things seemed to be okay as well until he had woken up, to nothing though. He looked around the room and noticed Grandma was still asleep next to him, so he decided not to wake her up, until he looked to the window and saw a man, again pale and smiling at him. My brother didn't scream or cry. He watched him smile at him and said that the man grabbed the corners of his mouth to stretch out his smile, and this made my brother, of course, frightened, which led him to move my grandma until she woke. She did, and she saw the same thing too. I don't know what she did next or what else happened that night, only that she told my parents about it, and she didn't feel comfortable having us sleep in the living room without my grandpa being there anymore. Now, all of these occurrences did not happen in the same timeline, obviously. None of us knew each other's own until very recently, in fact. Meaning that the last occurrence of this, my brother's, of which happened several years ago, just came to light for us, and my family still doesn't know that I saw the same man. I'm genuinely curious as to any explanations of what this may be or what I should do about it. It's a really weird situation, I know that, and just don't know what to do about it. This happened in my early 20s, and to this day I still cannot fully explain it. It started with a disturbing dream my mum had the night before. Her boyfriend at the time, who worked as a security guard at the local hospital, shared what happened the next morning, and genuinely it left us both pretty shaken. So he told me that around 3 or 4 a.m, he was up early getting ready for work. He was sipping his coffee and half watching random shows on TV when he began to hear whispering. At first it was faint but distinctly aggressive, almost like it was right outside of the front door of the apartment. Confused by the timing and the tone, he got up to check it. But as he approached the door, the sound stopped. Thinking that it was nothing, he went back to his TV and coffee. Then it happened again. This time, the whispering was louder, clearer, and unmistakably coming from right outside of the front door. Feeling a mix of curiosity and irritation, he moved quickly to open the door and looked around. But again, there was nothing. No one in sight and no sounds. He shrugged it off as odd, but not impossible. Until it happened a third time. Only this time, there was no whispering. Instead, he heard a deep guttural man's voice almost yelling, and it was coming from my mother's room. Panicked, he ran to her room and swung the door open. My mum was laying in bed, speaking in a man's voice that he couldn't recognize. The words were garbled and unintelligible, but the tone was dark and commanding. He flipped on the light, shouting at her to wake up, and she eventually did, shaken and confused. She told him that she'd been having a nightmare about a shadowy figure trying to force itself upon her. She described the figure as something dark and menacing, unlike anything she'd ever dreamed before. As her boyfriend was telling me this the next day, we were both sitting in the apartment kitchen, and he was just reaching this part about the yelling when suddenly the lights in the kitchen went out. Well, all except for one. The timing was too perfect, and it was really creepy. Both of us froze, adrenaline spiking, and without even saying much, we just grabbed our things and left the apartment in a hurry. When we came back later, everything was normal. All the lights were working fine, and nothing else strange happened after that. To this day, I cannot help but wonder what exactly was going on that night. I get chills retelling this even to today, and a really unnerving feeling when I share it. It was so strange that he had promised my mum not to tell me about it, but I'm glad that he did, but it just leaves me with so many questions. I've always believed that my parents' house was haunted. I was born and raised in that house, and from ages 4 to 6, I saw some things that I still don't believe. Unfortunately, my parents saw or heard them too. That's not what this story is about though, but that's just a little bit of context. We moved into a new house the year that I turned 6. My parents hoped that nothing would haunt it, but I always had these weird feelings about it. This one room, we call it the orange room, due to the bright orange carpet that it had when we moved in, was sort of an in-between room, I guess. It sat directly in the middle of the house and acted as a sort of secondary living room. This room connected the main living room, the kitchen, and the bedrooms together, so you had to walk through it to go anywhere in the house. And I absolutely hated it. Something about that room just always felt so off. The first few years that we lived there, nothing ever really happened though. My consistent and repetitive nightmares from my old house, also another story for another time, they had stopped. I thought that maybe nothing would be wrong with this place, until one night. This new house sat on old train tracks. The tracks were pulled up and turned into a road, but the old wood still was used in some of the construction of the new housing. I didn't know this at the time, but I was about 9 when I started to hear it. The train whistle. I was sitting in the orange living room playing with Legos. I looked outside of the large bay windows and saw nothing, no one. We no longer have any trains running anywhere within a 50-mile radius of the house. But I would ask my mother about it, and she'd just say that I probably just heard a truck horn. The thing is that I was pretty obsessed with trains at the time, and I knew the difference between a train's whistle and a truck's horn, and this was definitely a train. In any case, I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to my imagination, until one day when my neighbor mentioned that she had wood from the old train tracks in her house. I got chills from that, and I knew that I wasn't crazy any longer. Things seemingly got worse after that, though. My mum tried to hide it, but I knew that she was scared too. One night, something that she couldn't explain happened, and I didn't know if I could believe her or not, but I was 12 at the time and knew about the small weird things my mum heard and saw, like the shadow of a cat sprinting behind a car, or some pictures being knocked over on a table, or once a Christmas bell ringing when she was home alone. She kept chalking it up to minor things, like the window was open, or the air was on, or it was a breeze, etc. One night, though, she really couldn't explain. The clock in the main living room was heavy and hung on a wall above our fireplace. Beneath the clock was the mantel, where my mother kept all of the picture frames with pictures of myself, my sister, and my cousins. It was fall, so there were added Halloween decorations around as well. I don't remember exactly how late it was, but we were all fast asleep. My mum heard a loud crashing sound coming from the living room. Obviously, she freaked out. She woke my dad up and urged him to go and take a look, but he was exhausted, so she dragged him out of bed, and they both made their way to the living room. And what they saw, neither of them could explain. The clock, it had fallen off of the fireplace. And I mean, that's possible, right? But it should have fallen straight down, right onto the mantel, correct? Well, it didn't even touch the mantel. The mantel was in pristine condition. Nothing had been moved. The clock, however, was about 10 feet from the fireplace, in the middle of the living room, face down. My dad and her tried to recreate it the next morning, but the fireplace was brick, and nothing that they did, not even a breeze or a draft or the AC, could have caused it to go that far. A few more years went by, though, before the next incident, and it was winter. I was about 16. I would play games late into the night on weekends at this age, and it was about 2:30 in the morning when I was finally turning everything off to go to bed. Every time that I would shut stuff off, I would look out the large bay window by the orange room just to make sure that the outside lights had been turned off. This night, when I looked outside, I noticed that the lights had been turned off, but that something was also seemingly staring back at me. I freak out at this and sprint to my parents' room, waking them both up. I told them what I saw looked like a man with an extremely long face staring at me through the window. My dad grabbed a metal bar and went out into the living room, but nothing. No person, no footprints, no tracks in the snow. I know what I saw, though, and it was definitely a face. That's also, though, when the nightmares started to return. The exact same ones from when I was a kid. Other weird occurrences happened too, like a tan figure standing in the background of one of my Snapchat pics, the background of which was the orange room, or a distorted selfie that I took where my eyes were blacked out, also standing in that room. Well, I moved out soon after that, and I escaped the nightmares and the weird experiences once more. I would visit from time to time, but nothing else ever seemed to happen after that. Well, that is until 2 weeks ago. You see, we were decorating our Christmas tree and I was happily moving ornaments from one tree to another when I heard it. The strange, familiar sound of my mother's Charlie Brown snow globe playing music. I whipped my head around, stopping dead in my tracks, and watched as the snow globe suddenly stopped playing. Upon seeing that, I could barely breathe. My mum entered the orange room and saw me standing there pale as a ghost, she said. Then she asked if I had turned the dial on the snow globe. I told her no and straightened my posture. I told her that I was passing through and showed her the ornaments that I was holding, and explained that I couldn't have turned the dial on at all. It's on the bottom of the snow globe and would require the use of both of my hands to turn it on anyway, as it's pretty old and hard to spin. I asked when she put the snow globe on the shelf, wondering if it was leftover movement in the mechanism from when she put it out, and she told me that she had put it there 5 hours prior when I had just woken up, which means that really, it couldn't have been residual movement. I don't want to go back in that room. I feel so weird when I do. Christmas is coming up and I know that I'll have to be in there, but I really don't want to. It sucks and I'm dreading what will happen the next time that I go back. I moved to Georgia when I was 13 years old, into a fairly nice neighborhood after my dad got a promotion. I mention this because it's not typical that paranormal experiences occur with relatively new homes. It was maybe a 10-year-old house, no deaths in the house, and we got the house from a nice young family looking for a larger home. I always lived in a warm, cozy, and inviting home growing up, but this one, though, felt immediately unsettling. My parents' room was downstairs, along with everything that you'd find on the main level of a home. Upstairs was just the guest bedrooms and an entertainment room or office. One of the upstairs rooms is where I slept, though. Downstairs always had calm and nice energy where I always felt secure, regardless of if I was home alone or not as well. Upstairs, though, was a completely different story. I would feel cold randomly, like an uneasy energy was around me. I'd swear that I saw shadows too. But that was the extent of it for the first few months of being there. We only lived there 6 months before moving to a home across the street, so this was a quick moment in my life, but the last 3 months of living in that house, I would wake up feeling like I just wasn't alone, like I was being watched. I was unwelcome up there, and it wasn't just the creepy feeling from before, but this was one more alarming. I'd have doors open at night too, lights be turned on, and the most unexplainable thing was my TV in my room would not only turn on, but would be set to a channel that I'd never watched, and be set at full blast volume too. My parents would yell at me for waking them up with the TV, and I'd always tell them that it wasn't me. They genuinely thought that I was lying and was staying awake at night, but while I lived there, I was always unhappy, sad, and felt alone as well. I blamed it on moving across the country as a kid during a tough part of life for a child. I started thinking that I was crazy, in fact. Then we got the opportunity to move to a home directly across the street at the original home my parents wanted. We moved out and into the new home, and immediately, everything was just drastically better. No negativity, no fear, calm and happy vibes, no experiences. And it remained this way until I moved out as a young adult, and eventually my folks moved as well. We met the young family who sold us the original home accidentally about a year after we moved out, and they learned that we'd left. They told my mother that they were convinced the home was haunted and even felt bad for not saying anything. They told us that items would be moved, electronics would turn on, and they always felt uneasy. My dad never believed it, but my mum did from that day on, and I was thankful for that. I always have been pretty skeptical myself, but I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole of the paranormal activity lately, and I keep thinking back to my own experiences. My parents sold that house to a Chinese businessman who would only stay in the house a few times a year for business. The rest of the time, it just sat there empty. I'd look from the window of my new home to the window of my old room, and I know that this is going to sound weird, but the house just seemed dark and happy that nobody was there. I want to hear what others have to say, though. I never experienced anything else besides this. The neighborhood was built on top of an old horse farm, and possibly before that a plantation as well. Maybe the home was built on top of a gravesite. I have no clue, to be honest, but I would genuinely love to hear what you guys think about this. For a little bit of background information, I come from a group of people whose cultural and religious beliefs surround shamanism. Our origins left our people with a deeply rooted spiritual connection. But me personally, I'm not a shaman. I'm a Christian. Now, during my high school years, I was never really into my faith or Christianity. I loved and enjoyed the thrill of watching scary movies for fun as a hobby as well, and I believed in the paranormal, but never had any real first-hand experiences. Because of my ethnicity and culture, I heard a lot of scary ghost stories through friends and family members, including their own personal experiences even. A lot of it ties into the shaman religious cultural beliefs and rules, and, for example, it's a known rule to never respond if you hear your name being called, if you know for a fact that nobody is around, that is. If you're not entirely sure, it's better to not respond, but instead to check to see if someone's home who might have called for you. It's believed that if it's a spirit calling for you, then they're trying to get your attention. If you answer, you let the spirit know that you heard them, and they will latch onto you, generally taking your response as a welcoming to impede on your life. Now, I remember a few different family friends, who are all shaman, sharing similar stories about hearing their names being called, but they knew for certain that nobody was home. Just in case, they would check the entire house without saying a word or responding, and it turns out that no one would end up being home. There's more terrifying experiences that were shared with me, but I'm going to leave them out of this because this could already be pretty long, so I won't get into it. So, I was just an average girl with a typical teenage life. I had no real first-hand paranormal experiences or anything, like I said before. I only ever experienced sleep paralysis for a short period of time, and that was during my sophomore year in high school. The first couple of times were pretty freaky, I'll admit, but eventually I got used to them, and some days I'd just be so exhausted after school that during an episode of sleep paralysis, I'd be like, I'm just too tired for this. I'm going to go back to sleep, and then I would just KO. Eventually, they also stopped after about 2 weeks. I understand the science behind sleep paralysis, as I did some research on it, but I'm including this experience because, in my culture, it's known to be a spiritual encounter. We have a different term for it in our language, which in English translates to getting or being sat on by spirits. Yeah, I know, kinda weird and funny, but that's just what it is. Now, I didn't experience much during my sleep paralysis, so I didn't really think much of it, to be honest. I just couldn't move and felt a lot of anxiety, which is pretty typical. But then I'd be able to feel a release and get up like I just woke up from a really bad nightmare. I didn't feel any kind of presence before, during, or after the experience. I never saw anything either, so I pretty much just summed it up as being the good old science-type sleep paralysis explanation. But in terms of the paranormal world, that's really about the closest thing that I'd ever really experienced. And it wasn't really anything truly spiritual, I guess you could say. Well, all except one night. During my junior year, I had a very traumatic experience. I won't say for certain that it was ghosts, but I'm definitely convinced that it wasn't a dream either, and it was the worst form of sleep paralysis, if that's what it was, that I've ever had. I also hope to really never experience anything like it ever again. So it was a normal Saturday, and at bedtime I tucked myself in with my phone charging on my pillow, next to my head. I had an old Verizon flip phone since this was the year 2011, and my folks couldn't afford to get me an Apple phone at the time. Anyway, I always charged my phone during the night, and I would place it front side up on my pillow next to my head. While charging, the front screen would stay on and it would light up the surface of my ceiling. Everything was normal, everything felt fine. Eventually I fell asleep, but later woke up in a bit of a daze because I felt someone was calling for me from the door of my bedroom and was standing out in the hallway. It was really strange though, because I didn't actually hear anyone or see anyone, but I knew someone was there. It's sort of the same sense as you know someone's in the bathroom, or someone just entered the room, or a car even if you don't look to see. I was in a bit of a daze, almost like half being awake and half asleep. I thought it must have been my baby sister, a 12-year-old at the time, trying to wake me up. I said aloud, "Hannah, what do you want?" Mind you, I'm not actually seeing anyone, but I just feel that someone's there. I didn't think much of it because I was so tired, but I just knew that someone was there and someone was trying to wake me up. Eventually, though, I fell back asleep since they didn't say anything back to me and I just KO'd out again. I woke up again, though, but I wasn't in a daze this time. I slowly opened my eyes and slowly started to wake up. I'm thinking to myself, why am I awake? What time is it? I'm still kind of tired. I peek at my phone to check the time. It's close to 3 a.m. now, and again, the front of my flip phone is already on because it stays on while being plugged into charge. The front displays the time, so I don't have to do much to check the time. My phone is next to my head, so I simply turn my head and slightly face the screen towards my eyes to see the time. I move my phone back. With every intention of just slowly drifting back to sleep, I'm just sort of looking up at the ceiling and I see a light from my phone screen hitting the surface of the ceiling. This is normal because I charge my phone like this every night. And suddenly, after looking for, I would say no more than 3 seconds, I see a huge shadow move from the left side to the right side across the ceiling where the light was hitting. The best way that I can describe it is as if I were to take my hand and hover it over the front of my flip phone, maybe 4 to 5 inches away, and move my hand starting from one end and across to the other end of my phone, interrupting the light being casted onto the ceiling. This would create a similar effect to what I saw, except the shadow took up the whole entire space of the light, hitting the surface as it made its way over from one side to the other, left to right. I was sort of in disbelief. I was still pretty tired, so I doubted myself and what I just saw. I was thinking that I must just be seeing things because I'm tired, or maybe a bug or something went in front of the light. So I thought, I'll just keep my eyes open and keep looking, just to see. I was trying to verify that it was nothing and that I was just being crazy and I was tired. Well, 2 seconds later, I see a huge shadow moving across the ceiling where the light is hitting again. The first time was left to right, the second time it moved from right to left. And this is when I finally really woke up and my eyes widened. I was now not tired anymore. I was freaking out on the inside and terrified a bit, but I remained still because I had no idea what I just saw or what had just happened. I was frozen in fear and instantly closed my eyes out of fear. But things got worse. Suddenly, I felt the atmosphere of the room change. It's hard to describe, but it was like the gravity around me felt heavy, and it was thick like the humidity in Florida. It felt ominous. A second after the atmosphere changed, I experienced something similar to sleep paralysis where I couldn't move, but I didn't dare try to speak either. I was petrified. I quickly felt an ominous presence on my bedside. It had the same heavy feeling like when the atmosphere changed. It moved towards the foot of my bed and began to climb onto the bed. The first move that it made onto the bed as well, I could literally feel the area in which it climbed on. It felt like a 300-pound person was climbing onto the bed too. I felt each indent as it climbed closer to me and over my legs. I could feel the lower end of my body move and sink in towards where it was climbing each time. I felt the weight of it shifting my bed from right to left every time that it crawled closer to me. I was crying on the inside, and suddenly it stopped, and I felt an incredibly heavy pressure weighing down on my chest. It was hard to breathe, and I was crying and praying to God for help. Mind you, I was a high school girl who didn't take her faith seriously. I was really only a Christian by name. But after 2 or 3 minutes of praying and begging for help, everything just suddenly subsided, and I was released and able to move freely. I was extremely afraid though, in shock, and was just trying to process everything. I laid there for a minute until I gathered the courage to hop out of bed, and I literally ran out of my room, straight to my little sister's bed to sleep with her that night. I accidentally woke her up. She was confused and asked me why I was there. I told her that I was really scared, and she asked me what happened, but I didn't tell her. I was too afraid to speak about what had just happened. I couldn't sleep by myself or in my own room for a whole month after that too. I ended up sleeping in my sister's bedroom with her for about 4 to 5 weeks straight. I tried not to think about it, and I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to remember it. But I think I eventually told my mum about it a couple of months later. But I never really shared this experience with anybody else because I thought, well, for one, people for sure probably wouldn't believe it, with the exception of other religiously spiritual people, I guess. And two, I genuinely hated talking or even thinking about it because it was so traumatic. This is the first scary paranormal experience that I have ever had, and I genuinely pray to God that it is my last. If anyone is curious as well, no, I did not become a real Christian or born-again Christian after this, surprisingly as that may seem. I also stopped sleeping with my phone screen face up. I would charge it and always turn it over, so no light would be hitting the surface of the ceiling any longer. I never experienced anything after that like that ever again. And as I said, the reason why I don't believe that it was sleep paralysis or why I was dreaming or anything is because I distinctly remember being awake before it happened. This happened shortly before weed was legalized in Germany. In Berlin, regulation was already quite loose. As long as you didn't explicitly bother anyone, you usually wouldn't get arrested for smoking in public. I've been smoking daily for years now. I know it's not great, but that's beside the point. I usually function pretty well when I'm on it. However, I almost never smoke in public, partly to avoid trouble, but mostly because I enjoy the comfort of my own home. Now, one late night at around 3 in the morning, I was chilling online with some friends, ready to call it a day. I wanted to relax with a smoke in one of my favorite shows, but unfortunately I had no snacks left. Determined to end the night with a proper munchie session, I decided to hit up a nearby small convenience store, similar to a 7-Eleven here. At that hour, only the sketchiest ones are still open, often operating illegally, so I grabbed my coat and keys but stopped short before leaving. Why not add a little bit of joy to this cold walk, I thought, rolling a small smoke. I lit it up as I stepped outside, braving the freezing breeze. Now, the area that I live in is pretty rough. Mostly foreign students, many from Arabic countries. Poor integration has led to crime and violence being all too common here, unfortunately. Even so, I was still in pretty good spirits though as I strolled toward the flickering neon sign of the convenience store. Just one more intersection to go, in fact. That was when a group of men stood at the corner. They looked Middle Eastern and a little bit older than me, watched me as I walked by. It felt pretty normal for here anyway, to be honest. Nothing really to worry about, I thought, already feeling the kick of my smoke. I crossed the street without giving them much thought. Then I heard a voice call out, "Routine ID check, please show me your identification." My heart sank. Of course, this has to happen the one night that I smoke in public, I thought, turning to face the police. Only they weren't police. It was the group from the intersection, now slowly approaching me. "Routine ID check, please show me your ID. We're undercover cops," one of them said with a smug grin. I froze. The fact that they weren't cops became clear when, despite their demand, none of them reached for any identification. "You know smoking weed is illegal, don't you?" the man continued. His pupils were enormous as well, like saucers. They began circling me like predators. "Show us what's in your pocket," the leader demanded. So it's a robbery, I thought. Well, as long as I don't resist, maybe I'll only lose my phone and the few bills that I brought for snacks. But then, a wave of dread suddenly hit me. My weekly tips, about 300 euros in cash, were also in my pocket. I had forgotten to deposit it earlier, and losing that money would crush my tight budget for the month. So, what now? As I slowly reached into my pocket, the leader pressed me. "What's taking so long?" I pulled out an old pack of gum and some broken headphones, hoping to satisfy them. "Where's your wallet? I need your ID," he insisted. Still fumbling, too stubborn and stupid to hand over my tips, he inadvertently revealed something that shocked even me, the glint of a Glock tucked into his belt. Now, knives and metal rods are typical weapons here, but a gun? That was kind of insane for Germany, even by local standards. German gun laws are incredibly strict. My adrenaline suddenly spiked upon seeing it. Slowly, I pulled out the €5 bill I'd planned to use for my snacks, trying to keep my expression neutral. "You've got no wallet?" he growled, his face darkening. My brain screamed at me to do something, anything before this escalated further. Then a desperate thought flashed through my mind. These Arabic men in this area had a well-known fear of Russians. There were frequent clashes between the two groups. So maybe, just maybe I could use this. So in the best and heaviest Russian accent that I could muster, I stammered, "My friends have my wallet. They're coming soon. We meet here." To my surprise, their poor English comprehension worked in my favor as well. They exchanged glances, muttering in German, and decided to wait. I forced myself to look confused, maintaining the bluff, and it worked. Their effort to translate or figure me out must have seemed like too much trouble. The leader finally pointed at my €5 bill. "All right then, you can get us something to drink." Reluctantly, I followed him into the convenience store I mentioned earlier. They grabbed a 6-pack of Coke. I paid for it, heart pounding. I was certain that this wasn't going to be over, that they'd either search me themselves or retaliate when my non-existent friends didn't show up. But then, thank the heavens, just like that, they left. No violence, no further questions, nothing. I stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Looking back, I cannot believe that I bluffed in such a dangerous situation. It genuinely could have been my last day on Earth, and all over 300 euros. I've definitely learned my lesson though from this, and these days I avoid walking around late at night when the streets are dark and empty. Back in 2005, I had an incredible experience that I would like to share. I kind of keep this to myself for, the better part of nearly 20 years. Pretty much because I'm just a normal dad with kids now and a career, and I don't want to, have any problems. But some things have happened when I was young that still stun me to this day, and this is certainly one of them. So, I attended a party in northern New South Wales, Australia, in the spring of 2005. These bush doofs were frequented by odd and usual people of different subcultures, but on this night, it was stranger than the usual ravers that I was used to. They were much more pleasant, much more friendly, I guess. At first, the party was relatively normal, like any other party of its type. Lots of electronic music, people dancing and enjoying the atmosphere. I was there with my girlfriend at the time, who was a bit of a free spirit and seemed to just know absolutely everyone at the party, which honestly wasn't unusual. She seemed to either develop instant chemistry with anyone or already just sort of knew people, and I never got to the bottom of that, but she and I mostly went our separate ways at parties like this and would just meet up randomly as the doof brought us back together. During the night at the party, I met a few interesting people though. This wasn't the first time that I'd met supernatural types or had strange experiences at a party like this, but it was the first time that it happened that I wasn't on drugs. The first one that I remember was a guy silently gesturing to me. I sort of didn't realize that he even was gesturing to me, so just sort of stared blankly until another guy grabbed me and he pointed to the ground where the dude was gesturing. As it turns out, the guy was trying to bring my attention to himself, seemingly manifesting a small energy orb, about the size of a marble at the tip of his fingertips, hovering about a few centimeters above the ground. It was translucent, almost like a bubble, but it was more dense and hovering perfectly still, and seemingly manifested by this guy. Or maybe he was just pointing at it. I'm not sure, but I know that I reacted with awe, as you would, right? And both guys were happy with my reaction. They sort of celebrated with each other and with me, without making many sounds. I continued to party. Cool fun magic orb trick, right? Let's go. But the second one I met was when I was sitting by the open fire. She was sitting across from me, a pretty-looking white woman with a short cropped brown haircut and a crochet beanie on her head. Relatively normal-looking type of northern New South Wales raver, I guess. We caught each other's eyes, and then suddenly, I could hear her voice inside of my head. Well, not at first, but at first we had a brief conversation sort of telepathically without me realizing that it was even happening. I don't remember many of the talking points, but it was probably me thinking about how cute she was and her replying or whatever. When I first noticed it, she even laughed because I instantly rejected what was occurring and physically jumped a little bit. She must have reassured me pretty quickly because we sat there discussing something for a long time. Again, the words were taken from me, so I can't remember much of the discussion, but what happened next was pretty intense. She told me that she could do pretty much anything, and that I could as well while she was there. Pretty wild, right? Well, she evidenced it by reaching into the fire and picking up a handful, not a coal, but a handful of embers, and holding the fire in her hands. She did this with no pain, dropped it, or dismissed it, and then showed me no injury and told me to try. So I did, and it worked. She was, like the previous dudes, completely thrilled as well, and her joy actually was so palpable that it completely washed over me. It was, for a lack of a better way of saying it, an intensely euphoric feeling, paralyzing so, pure joy that just overwhelmed every one of my senses. And the next thing that I know, I'm being stirred awake by a random raver-looking dude, and it's dawn. I'm snuggled into a sleeping bag and under a tree, and I had the best night's sleep that I'd ever had. He gives me a small thimble full of hot brown liquid and gestures for me to drink it. He seems super awesome, so I do, and it tastes sort of like a coffee, but a bit different. Very pleasant, warming, and soothing. I get up and I notice that the party looks different. There are no cars around, nobody drinking, nobody passed out on the ground, nobody looking like post-doof regret partiers, just 20 or so very quiet, very peaceful people, and the DJ, and my girlfriend sitting with them on a rug as they cooked up a hot meal, some sort of stew or vegetable curry. So I walked over to her, but as I did, I noticed that more people were emerging seemingly from behind the trees in the forest that was surrounding the glade that the party was in. All of them were attractive, but not overwhelmingly so, I guess. Men, women, and children all emerged from behind the trees. I don't know how many, but the party picked back up and they basically just all started dancing with each other, being merry and all that. No talking though. Only me, my girlfriend, and the girl from the fire, who was now sitting next to my girlfriend, seemed to talk. I walked over to them and I must have had a look of shock or awe on my face or something, while both of them had a look of complete contentment and happiness, which definitely calmed me a bit. They gestured for me to sit down, so I did. They served me a bowl of food and I wolfed it down. Next thing that I know, I'm laying face down and completely incapacitated. All I remember now is feeling a mild static electricity in the back of my head. I eventually came to and sat up, and they asked if they could paint me, so I let them. They drew on me with dye or ink, and it was pleasant enough, I guess. Everyone was still having a good time, mind you, and it took what felt like maybe 15 minutes for them to finish. As soon as they did, the music stopped, people started retreating into the forest, their demeanor changed to almost hostile, and my girlfriend told me that we had to go. She almost dragged me out of the glade and down a small lane that quickly turned into the main road to the highway. Suddenly, all the hungover people and the cars were all visible again. We walked about a kilometer back to the main road and attempted to hitchhike to the nearest town, which took ages. Eventually, we finally got collected and I was able to look in the mirror, and they had painted me in the most incredible clown makeup that I'd ever seen. It was really impressive, to be honest, but I certainly felt like I'd been, I don't know, maybe mocked or maybe even laughed at, perhaps. Well, my girlfriend and I drifted apart not long after that, and as I said, this was a small part of a large series of events over a fairly long period, and my memory of the time isn't amazing for a number of reasons, but this night stuck out for obvious reasons. Also, I still had that clown paint on for quite some time after this, so that was confirmation for me that what I experienced there, it wasn't just a dream or just a hallucination. Something weird was going on, and I have no idea what it was to this day. This happened to me a few years ago now. So I was working overnight at the time. I was sleeping during the day, and in the middle of one of these sleeps, I was startled awake because I saw a dark figure standing next to my bed. By dark, I mean more like it was hard to tell what it looked like, but besides human and standing, if that makes sense. But in my groggy state, I could tell that it was holding like a bucket, as if it was just about to go and dump it on me. And I sat up in a rage, swinging at it like, "No, you won't." Grappling with it was futile though, because it was over my bed, so it had the height advantage, and it easily dumped the entire contents of the bucket over my head. I was super annoyed and aggravated, but I realized that the figure was gone. But I was completely soaked. My blankets were soaked and my bed was soaked as well. As I sat there becoming more lucid, I grew more horrified about how weird this actually was. My bedroom is tiny, my door was locked, I was alone in the house, nothing could hide under my bed or in my closet or anywhere else in my room, at least without me being able to easily spot it. I was also able to wring easily a full bucket of water out of my blanket, and it was so soaked that I eventually gave up on falling back to sleep, put it in the dryer with my bedding to get all the water out, and just stayed up. A giant puddle was on the floor as well of my room that I had to mop up. I smelled it too and stopped short of tasting it, but as far as I could tell, it was just regular, colorless, scentless water. Not sweat or urine or puke or anything. There's not enough room in my body for all this liquid anyway that a mysterious figure poured onto my head in the middle of the day while I was trying to fight to keep it off from doing that. No drugs, no alcohol, I wasn't mentally unwell or anything, and there were no pipes over my head or anything like that. I even climbed into the attic later to double check that. Sunny outside and it wasn't raining or anything. Eventually I went back to bed because I had work that night and I wanted to get some sleep. I told a few of my closest friends and they were all like, "Wow, that's crazy, but I'm sure that there's some sort of an explanation for it." Well, several years later, I still sleep in the same room and I still cannot explain it. This story takes place in 2016. My parents had just bought our first house in Cold Springs, Nevada. It was a beautiful house too, grand spanking new, and only one prior owner who was a religious nut and stayed in our driveway for a week after we moved in. My dad, he had to pull his pistol out at some point and tell him to leave the property, and that we were not going to pay for him to live in our front yard, basically. But that's besides the point. You see, growing up, we had always lived in an apartment. Not the worst apartment, but certainly not the best because, Reno, Nevada. But in 2016, we had moved into this brand new house, planted grass, done a new sprinkler line, and so on and so forth. But when we were moving in, we had the charter people over installing our internet cables, and we found this crawl space or attic in the laundry room. The charter guy came down while we were still moving stuff in and stopped my dad, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm not trying to alarm you or anything, but in the rafters upstairs there appears to be a pair of woman's panties nailed to the rafters." My dad stops dead in his tracks and goes, "What? Excuse me?" He then asks me to put on a pair of gloves and to go and take a look, to which I do because at this time I'm like 16, 17 years old. And when I get up there, sure enough, on the rafters in the middle of the room, there's a pair of white woman's panties with a pink bow in the middle, nailed to the rafters, and they appeared to be used and really, really gross. My dad hands me a hammer and I pull the panties down, putting them in a trash bag and throwing them in the trash. Not thinking too much about it after the police department says that there's no sign of foul play. Cut to a couple of months later and things in the house start to get a bit weird, like cabinets opening on their own, the sound of footsteps in the hallway in the bathroom, and a weird groaning sound coming from the vent in the bathroom across from my bedroom. I tried my best to ignore it, but honestly it was hard to shake it. And one night, I'm home alone playing on my Xbox when I hear noises in the kitchen. Growing up in Reno leaves you a little bit paranoid that tweakers are going to break into your house or something like that. So I grabbed my dad's gun from his bedroom and I started sweeping the house. I don't find anything in the end, so I put it back in its holster and start walking towards my bedroom. When I turn from the kitchen towards the hall leading to the bedrooms, that was when I see a woman in a dress. I nearly jumped out of my skin, and I screamed, and she seemed to run towards the laundry room. So I pulled my gun again and ran towards the laundry room, but when I did, I couldn't find her anywhere. There were no doors opened, no way that she could have climbed up into the attic. She was just gone. So, Dumbfounded, I put the gun back, put my headset to full volume, and I just proceeded to play my Xbox like nothing happened. A couple of days go past, and I then start seeing her multiple times throughout the week. Cut to a few months later, and I say, I'm sort of done with this, and she's standing at the end of the hall staring at me at one point from towards the kitchen, so I just bulk up and I run at her. I expect her to do something, but instead she just vanished into thin air. I tell her to leave me alone and to just leave, and that she's not welcome in this house. I spend the next couple of weeks choosing to ignore any potential activity, just for the woman to never show her face again. Every once in a while, though, I would still hear sounds and moans, but nothing more than that, and the sounds in the bathroom completely stopped about a week after that, and I never saw her again. I moved out in 2020, and I left the state of Nevada and that experience behind. But lately, it's been sitting in the back of my head, so I thought that I should share it with all of you guys. Thanks for listening, and I hope you all enjoyed my interesting first home experience. When I was a child, my mother took care of my grandparents and we lived in the basement. At one point, my cousin lived there too, and we always had a creepy feeling that something was down there watching us. It was the usual stuff, I guess you could say. Cats staring at places that they normally don't, drapes moving with no air, just a general sense of unease as well. Now, for the longest time, we assumed perhaps that it was my great-grandma bound to her furniture below. But once our grandparents moved, and my mum moved upstairs, that's when we started having doubts it was something benevolent, or at the very least my nana's ghost wasn't alone. She started having nightmares of 3 faceless men yelling at her, verbally abusing her, telling her what a failure and how damned she was. I think as a child, not knowing any better, I talked to it and bonded to it even. A strange and chilling familiarity, if nothing else. Well, my mum meets her current husband at this time, a good man with the sixth sense, if you believe in all that stuff, as well as my stepsister. At this time, my mum had told no one about these nightmares, mind you. First night my stepsister is there, and she's young at the time. She points out to the window and says that there's a faceless man in the window. Well, we move out within a week, and as my mum's getting the last stuff, multiple doors just start slamming. I had thought that it was just one basement door until this Christmas as well. We eventually moved out of state, but something was still attached to me. I'm not sure if it was the same thing, because it seems that the thing is sort of bound to that house, I guess, but I told a friend of my experiences and how the literal day before, something pushed really hard on my chest. Turns out she practiced Wiccan and performed a lot of removal spells. I'd never felt that freed before as well, like it was actually gone. Well, about a decade goes by, and by then, the Slender Man thing had become a household name for horror. I showed my mum at some point because I was playing the game or whatever, and she immediately went pale. That was him, apparently, the faceless one. Now, over 7 years since showing her that picture, I've befriended another Wiccan or two, and one of them had a pendulum that could answer yes or no, and eventually, a line of questioning led to that thing, and it remembers us all. It apparently wants us to come back. My mum and stepdad moved back to the area, and every time my mum passed that road, she has to fight going down there. Present day, I have come to the region, past that street to the house, and also felt compelled to go down there, but I did nothing. This Christmas, I'm here about 30 minutes from the house, but I had nightmares last night, and they were of it. My stepdad has a dream catcher blessed by a native shaman to keep some ghosts off the property, but it feels like I'm close enough where it's just trying to get back. It can't get through for whatever reason, but I'm terrified after all of these years that it's trying to latch back onto me. Over the years, I've had a few paranormal encounters, I think even a trickster ancestor, and my mum's side's grandparents trying to guide me as well, but this, I don't know if it's my own fear or anger from the way the world is that is attracting it. Maybe it's all in my head, I'll admit that too, but since this morning I just cannot shake the feeling that it's trying to bind itself to me again. Like, the second that I leave this property, I just have this weird feeling, and I'm honestly terrified, and I don't know what to do. We moved into our house nearly 6 years ago. There's extended family living with us, and when we first moved in, I noticed something angry or seemingly malicious in my kids' nursery. We had the poltergeist works, shadow figures walking back and forth across the door, glimpses in the corner of someone standing there, kids later on saying somebody stands there at night, sometimes a muffled voice or footsteps if you weren't in the room. I took action when I saw our kids waking up with bruises though. Things were getting thrown clear across the room, and finally I was run out of the room with my daughter by a shadow figure that leant directly into my peripheral vision. And all I felt was that get the heck out of my space sort of energy. I like to think that I handled it just fine. Holy water, sage, sachets in the four corners, and a heck of a lot of you don't gotta cross but you can't stay here sort of lectures, and since then it left. Since then too, we've had a few separate incidences with other less angry spirits, I guess you could say, that I haven't had many issues with. Spirits and such things I can handle pretty easily, but that brings me to the reason that I've come here today. You see, at some later point we began to hear mimicking voices, the kind that pretend to be other family members and try to have you come toward them or get you to follow them upstairs or into the basement. It started with littleish things, like hearing the kids call out, or maybe an adult call us from upstairs that wouldn't reply when answered. Hearing shuffling or voices in a separate room when you're definitely home alone. Things that we thought could maybe be regular spirits again, but then one day I saw, not heard, my brother-in-law come down into the kitchen. At first I flinched because I didn't hear him come down. No weight on the stairs, no footsteps, no clothes shuffling. He sort of appeared in my periphery, and I turned to look at him dead on, and he was there. He looked around the kitchen for a second. I asked him if he needed something, and he looked at me, waved and smiled in a way that gave me a weird feeling but was odd at best. He walked out quickly after that without a word or a sound. Moments later, I heard our bells on the front door jingle, and that same brother-in-law came in the front door, home from an errand, and I asked if he forgot something, and he said that he'd been gone all morning, which was backed up by other family members that he'd seen on the way dropping things off during said errands. After that incident, things ramped up as well, but we still hadn't seen another full body again. I also heard voices, and I saw figures standing at the front of our basement from time to time that seemed to be family members and would call us down to look at something. It began to give us uneasy vibes, I guess. The feeling of, like, personal danger. From there, though, I knew the rules. If you see something, no you didn't, don't acknowledge it, don't give it fuel. Let that person call for you more than once or twice before you go looking. I kept the kids near me whenever I heard anyone call for them that I wasn't sure that they were home right away, and always kept the kids from running to the front door if we heard the bells. After a while, it died down too, and we hadn't had much happen on the mimic front for a year or two now. I hear shuffling and movements downstairs every once in a while at night, but it cannot be taken seriously because we don't live alone, you know. We'd had banging on our front door twice from seemingly no one at 3 a.m, but other than those things, which might actually have been other people, we've had relative peace. Until last night, and today that is. You see, me and my husband and our friend who's staying with us were wrapping gifts last night. We kept hearing walking upstairs, to the point where my hubby was going to go up and check if the kids were up, because nearly every 20 to 30 minutes we heard something. Then, I saw a dark-haired kid's head pop out from over the arm of the couch in the playroom next to us. No sound, but it was fully opaque and swooped down as soon as I turned my head. My friend noticed it as well, and my hubby, funny guy that he is, threw a marker to check if it was a kid. Trust me, I know, but it was midnight and getting up again was not on the agenda for him. With nothing and no one reacting to the marker, we just went back to it. Then we heard my friend's baby crying every 10, maybe 15 minutes, and as soon as she would come back down, the baby would start again. When she'd run up to check, he'd be fast asleep, but her TV would be playing something else that wasn't what she had on. So we tried to finish quickly and just head to bed thinking that he was having night terrors in his sleep or something and would possibly wake his siblings, who were somehow still asleep in the bed next to the crib. My friend decided to stay with the baby while we cleaned to see if he'd cry again, and he never did. Anyway, as we're cleaning up and turning out the lights, that's when we heard coughing and shuffling in whatever room was next to us. Especially so after all the lights were out, as my hubby was helping me upstairs. I'm heavily pregnant and disabled, so he had to keep a hand on me in case I got dizzy. He said that he could hear the shuffling though and coughing in the rooms downstairs, getting closer to the stairs as we were going up it. It freaked him out to the point that he hurried me into our room and locked the door behind us. The nursery with our kids is connected to our bedroom, and so we knew that it couldn't have been the kids in their room making noise as we were coming up, and our friend said that her kids were fast asleep as we were coming up as well. Well, fast forward to this morning, and I woke up at 2 a.m. because I thought that I heard my kids walking around our bedroom, and I mean, that's fine, but I check and no one is in our room or bathroom, and they weren't up. And so I went back to bed. But this morning at 6:38, I woke up because I heard quick shuffling around the house, both upstairs and down. I watched my friend's kids while she worked, so I figured that she had to go in early and I forgot or something. I sprang up as quickly as my belly would allow me and I went downstairs, but nobody was there. No one was awake, and I was too tired to remember that I was woken up by a movement down there, so I started to get myself some tea, and I then heard somebody talking over my shoulder on the stairs, like my friend bringing her baby down and talking to him quietly as usual. I was filling water for tea, so I hadn't turned, and then I heard her ask me something that I just couldn't make out, and I turned to clarify what she was saying. Only she wasn't there. At that, I was far more awake all of a sudden, and I remembered the night before and stayed quiet as I turned more lights on and sent her a text to see if she was awake. In the silence that followed, I heard the shuffling again in the playroom, but nothing more. I only got a reply about 10 minutes later saying that she wasn't awake but was coming down right then. She told me that it was because her alarms didn't go off and my text saved her for being late to work. That's when my hubby started texting in chat as well, saying that he'd heard the same things I was at the prior times that I'd mentioned. After that, the morning began a bit more normally, I guess you could say. The kids came down for food, and I kept them with me in the living room to allow my friend's other child to sleep. And yet, when she finally came down, she told us that someone had been knocking on her door to wake her up, and she was too scared to open it and check who it was. And not only is that out of character for her, but I know that we're home alone, and I had eyes on all the other kids the entire morning before that. Nobody left, not even for a bathroom break. So, long story short, mimics are outside of my experience. I need some advice on mimics and whatever I can do to deal with them safely, for my family and my kids' sakes. Any advice is helpful, and I don't know if things that I've mentioned and tried have ticked it off or if I'm doing the exact opposite of what I need to do, but I could really use some help because genuinely I am completely in the dark here. About 4 years ago, I used to travel for work all over the province. Occasionally, I would work in the surrounding towns of where I grew up. I would stay in a house where my step-grandparents used to live, but my brother owns it now after they both passed. A lot of their stuff was still there, furniture and other belongings. My brother was barely even there, so didn't mind me staying there while I worked, and it was free lodging, so I figured why not. Now, my step-grandfather was not a good man. In fact, the reason that I moved away was because there was a court case where he pled guilty for horrible crimes, and I was placed in foster care and moved to a city. So it felt uncomfortable being in that house in that first place, but he was dead and I was older, so I gave it a try. The first day in that house too, I took a bit of a tour. I closed my brother's bedroom door, and same with my nephew's, and I set up a camp in the living room, and then I went into the basement to turn on the water and the heat. When I went down there, I snooped around a little bit, just a bunch of boxes of their old stuff, and nothing caught my eye. I headed back upstairs, closed the basement door, and ate supper, and then I went to work. When I came back about 7 hours later, the bedroom doors and the basement door were open. Weird, but didn't freak me out too much. I told myself that it must have been me and I just forgot or something. I tried to rationalize it, I guess. I made supper, did a bit more work, and then settled in to watch a movie and go to bed. As I was laying in the dark, I felt like I was being watched though. I got up and put some sheets over the deer heads that my brother had on the walls. But the feeling of being watched, it didn't go away. I didn't sleep much that night too, but I didn't hear or see anything. It was just a weird feeling. Anyway, the next morning I closed the door again, and I even locked the basement door. The basement had a lock on the outside, as in if someone was in the basement they couldn't get out. I went to work, and 9 or so hours later I came back and all the doors were open again. Now that was weird because I knew that I had closed them this time. I went and wandered the house again, looking in all the rooms and braving the basement again even, but I didn't see anything weird. I certainly had a bad feeling in the basement. I went back and tried to relax a bit. That night I heard some noises in the basement, but I certainly wasn't brave enough to go down that night and take a look. The next day, though, I came up with a bit of a plan. This time I tied the 2-bedroom doors shut as they were in a corner, so I tied them together so that neither could open. I locked the basement door and put a few cases of beer that my brother had in front of the basement door, and I went to work. After work, I came back and those beer bottles were moved to the side, and the basement door was open again. I also looked at the doors, and the rope was untied, and the bedroom doors were open. At that, I was freaked out, and I drove the 3 hours back home to the city. I was telling some friends about how the house just didn't feel right, and I was worried that my step-grandfather's spirit or something was in that house. One of my friends was intrigued by this, and one thought that I was messing with them, but the next day we packed up a Ouija board, candles, sage, and a few other things. I brought those 2 friends, one a skeptic and one a believer. We drove the 3 hours down there. I gave them a tour of the house, and we set up a camp in the living room. After we got the board ready, we started, and I'll try to keep the story a bit shorter, but essentially we found out that there was a spirit attached to an object in the basement, apparently. Now, I've seen my fair bit of horror movies and knew that we shouldn't go down into the basement with the Ouija board and listen to a spirit, but, well, we went to the basement. The skeptic thought that we were just messing with him still at this point, and we head to the basement and set up the board on the top of the pool table. Once we started it back up, a weird smell like sewage filled the basement for a few seconds, and all three of us could smell it. Now, in the basement there were 2 pink walls and 2 green walls, so we asked the board if the object was closer to the pink wall or the green one. The board said the pink wall. I looked to my right, and right there staring at us was the vintage pink stuffed bear. None of us had seen it when I gave the tour, and I had not seen it any time that I went to the basement. I'd never seen it in my life, in fact. But we asked if it was the bear, and it said yes. At this point, even the skeptics started to come around a bit. We asked what it wanted, and it said home. So what did I do? I walked over to this creepy stuffed bear, picked it up, and I headed back upstairs. We proceeded to ask some questions, and apparently its name was Sarah, and she was 12. I proceeded to bring the bear home, asking the pendulum some questions on the 3-hour drive home. Don't worry, we closed off the session with the board properly. I put this bear in my garage. I set her on top of the board on a table and headed inside for the night. The next day, I went out to the garage to check and grab my board to bring it back inside, knowing that I wouldn't want the bear inside the house if I didn't know that she was going to be safe. When I walked in, the Ouija board was on the ground out of the box, and she was there, still, sitting on the table. I had placed her on top of the box, but yet she was still sitting and the board was on the ground. Weird, right? Well, years have gone by and I've moved twice since then and now no longer have a garage. For the first 6 months or so in the garage, things would move and go missing all the time. But when she first entered the house, my dog wouldn't enter the room that she was in. I kept her in my craft room, away from the public area. My dog would sit and stare at the doorway, and finally I just went up to the bear and said, "If you would like to stay in the house, I need you to stop freaking out my dog and get along and behave." The very next day, my dog entered that room with absolutely no issues. I now live on my own, and the bear is in my spare room. She's well behaved and nothing has happened in the years that I've lived here, and I still think that she's in there, but I have yet to find someone brave enough to talk with her again, and to be honest, I'm not sure I want to either. I had a pretty unsettling experience tonight at a cemetery nearby, and I'm curious if anybody else has encountered anything like this. So I visited my friend's grave at around 9:45 to 10 p.m. He was recently buried on Monday, and I've been visiting him every day since. I was by myself last night, Christmas Eve, with no issues, no strange feelings or sounds or anything. Everything felt pretty normal, and the tent from his burial was still set up, so I parked my car at the end of the cemetery, which is a place that you can drive through, and did the same tonight, on Christmas. I brought a friend along tonight, and we sat under the tent for a bit. I lit the same tea light that I left last night. Nothing strange happened, and we were just sitting there talking until around 10:05, when I said goodbye, and we started walking back to my car, and that's when things got a bit weird. You see, as we were walking, we heard growling and barking coming from the middle of the cemetery. We weren't sure what it was, but we kept walking towards my car. Then we see a large white dog, about the size of a large shepherd, but with patches or spots. It didn't approach us, but it was pacing back and forth, and the weird part was that it didn't seem like a normal dog. My friend heard it growling the whole time that we were walking back, and at this point we turned off our flashlights and started walking slowly, with my friend keeping his eyes on the dog while I kept my gaze on my car. The dog didn't move forward or toward us or seem aggressive or anything, but after a while it just sort of, well, for a lack of a better term, disappeared. Now, the cemetery is pretty open and we were both watching it, so we don't know how it just vanished like that, but once we were in the car and I locked the doors, things took another strange turn. As I was backing out, we both heard a woman's voice scream, "Help." It sounded like it came from near the cemetery, and we quickly left and we went to my friend's house where we noticed something. There were long, dragged finger marks on my car's trunk, and two very distinct, fresh fingerprints on the passenger side door. They weren't there when I first got into the car, and we certainly didn't stop to take pictures at the time, but it was pretty clear that something had left those marks. I don't know if it's related to the cemetery experience or maybe something else, but the whole thing was just really unsettling and I don't know what to think about it. So, has anyone here ever experienced anything like this, especially the growling dog or the woman's voice? I'm trying to make sense of it, but I'm really not sure what to think about all of it. So if you have any insight, then thanks in advance.